to Elephant Artist Relief Society's Umbrella Talk, Season 2, Talk 2, Should You Get an MFA, delivered by Marianne Elder. I'm Jill Armstrong, President of Elephant Artist Relief Society, and I'm happy to see you all here today. And before we get started, I would like to deliver our Treaty 7 land acknowledgement. I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional territories of the Blackfoot and the people of Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, Tsuut'ina, and the Stoney Nakoda First Nations, including Chiniki, Bears Paw, and the Wesley First Nation. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. So I would like to introduce Katie McKelvey, who will be the host for this afternoon. So enjoy, and Katie will explain what you need to do in case you have questions. So enjoy.
Thank you, Jill.
Welcome.
Thanks. I'm actually not the hosty host,
Oh.
but that would be Jacqueline. But I'm just going to introduce Marianne Elder. I'm Katie McKelvey. I'm the treasurer of Elephant Artist Relief, and our umbrella workshops are part of our creating programming for our members to help support their professional careers. There's no charge for this event, and I would like to thank our sponsors, the Alberta Foundation for the Arts, CADA, Calgary Art Development Association, and the Rosé Center for their sponsorship of our activities. Our programming, such as this workshop, is supported through those grants. If you can donate, or if you know someone who would like to donate, all of our donations go directly to artists. So our funding from the grantors helps our programming and our administration. However, all the support that we are able to give artists comes directly and is 100% funded by our donations. There is a donation button if you're interested. I would like right now to introduce to you Marianne Elder. Marianne Elder is an education consultant based in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. She has developed plans and programming for organizations on curriculum design, strategic enrollment management, data analysis, leadership, change management, and strategic planning. Prior to consulting work, she was the Associate Vice President, Student Affairs and Registrar for 8 years at the Alberta College of Art and Design. Marianne holds a Master of Fine Arts degree in Studio Art from the University of California, Irvine. I'm really pleased to introduce her. She knows so much about getting an MFA, how to get it funded, the schools in the United States and Canada. And if you have any questions during our session, please either raise your hand or send a chat. You can send a chat as she goes along so that there's a little bit of interchange, because you probably have a burning question that everybody else wants to know about too. So please don't be afraid to send us your questions. Is there anything else I need to say?
Don't think so.
Before I hand it over to you, Marianne?
Sure.
Okay. All right.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Katie. Thanks, Jackie, and thanks, Jill. Just going to go over sort of a few things. So in the chat, I'm actually going to ask all of you what you're hoping to learn today. Because there's just a few of us, I want to make sure that the information I provide you is relevant and what you're looking for. And although this session is called, you know, why or should you get an MFA, I'm going to talk about that, but I'm also going to talk about if you're looking at doing that, what you should be looking for, how to figure that out, and different sort of pieces of putting that together. Katie did a great introduction about sort of who I am and what my background is, but I always think it's important to let people know who I am, what I know, how I know it, and what I'm going to be talking about. So my background, I went and got a BFA, a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Studio Art from the University of Windsor, and I received a full ride scholarship to the University of California, Irvine. After that, I was the gallery director at Peggy Phelps and East Galleries in Claremont, California. I then started working as the program administrator of the MFA program at Claremont Graduate University and was an adjunct faculty in the Museum Studies program in an affiliation arts administration program with PhD and MA students at Claremont Graduate University. Also, I've done this particular topic. I've been a guest lecturer at a bunch of different places, including ACAD, a few universities in Ontario, and a bunch of colleges and universities in California. And I grew up in the middle of nowhere in Ontario, and I had no idea what an MFA was. I can speak to everything MFA, including music and theater, and I'll make sure that I cover that for you guys today, in addition to fine arts, visual arts, and we'll talk about sort of MAs, MFAs, PhDs, and graduate school sort of as a whole. Now, I don't know how many of you are actually looking at whether or not to get an MFA, or you're thinking about it and not sure how to look for them. One of the things that I always find interesting is when I started looking at graduate schools, I actually, and this is going to age me, but I remember I was looking at graduate schools in Canada and the US. And the only reason I looked at US schools, because everyone knows they're so expensive, was because I had professors in my undergraduate that said to me that, you know, you should really think about going to the US, you should really think about going to the US, which was odd to me. And I happened to be looking for schools to go to and researching them on September 11th. And so I sat watching the planes go into the towers while searching graduate schools in the US. So the one thing I'll say about sort of our time now is with COVID and sort of everything that's going on in the world, the information I'm going to give you is relevant pre-COVID in terms of, you know, post or, you know, present, what we're dealing with. There are funding challenges for universities right now that are significant. I will say that most institutions have been given 3-year budgets, so anything they would have had this year should be applicable for the next couple. But it will change possible funding, and it will change how far people want to go as well. I'll talk about Canada and the US, and I'll talk about the UK. If you have specific questions about Europe, I can answer those, and you can send a chat. If you'd like to send a chat and not be, have people not see what you're asking or see who you are, feel free. You can send them privately to Jackie or even privately to me, or you can just chat to everyone. That's up to you. So one of the things that I got to do was basically, in all of my travels between being a curator and being a professor and running graduate programs, one of the things that I've been able to do is I've sat on a probably just under 20 student portfolio assessments for students going into graduate programs. And so I know what those assessments look like. I know what faculty look like, how the votes work, and how that all runs through. So I want to make sure that I cover some of that inside knowledge on the back end for you as well. And the first thing I'm going to talk about is, what are we looking at if you're looking at an MFA? So the MFA versus the MA versus other degrees like a PhD. So most of you would know when I say the term undergraduate, I'm talking about a bachelor's degree. So that would be the first 4 years in university that you attend. When you are finished that, and some people go into, whether it's education, if they're looking to teach in elementary and high school, or they're going into sort of other degrees. And there are a lot of programs that actually have joint degrees. And one of the things you need to look for and understand is what a terminal degree is. So the MFA is a terminal degree, much like the PhD. So what that basically means, and I actually pulled up a couple of things for you. So the difference is, and I'm going to share my screen so you can see. I have a bunch of different things for you to look at today. So the difference with a terminal degree, which is whereas an MA or MSc or PhD work, an MFA is the highest level of formal qualification you can get within fine art, theater arts, and music. There are PhD programs, but they tend to be much more sort of theoretical based, where the MFA is still the gold standard for students that are looking to get the terminal degree within the arts, and it allows you to be able to teach. Now, where if I had a PhD in geography, then I could, teach geography. If I had an MA in geography, I'm not qualified. So the terminal degree for the arts is the MFA. And in looking at that, you have to think about it in terms of your practice versus sort of theoretical or academic sort of research. And you're looking for something that has a fairly decent balance between theoretical and practice. So if you're looking at an MA or an MFA, and you're going to do those 2 extra years no matter what, I always suggest to students to really think about looking for the MFA or going after a terminal degree. And when you're looking for schools, it's really important that when you're looking at them, you actually look at the designation, like what degree you're actually going to get at the end of the time you're there. Because there's a lot of instances of schools that they look like an MFA program, they act like an MFA program, but the degree you get at the end is not an actual MFA. One of the good examples of that is Emily Carr. So you can go to Emily Carr for a Master of Applied Arts, not a Master of Fine Arts. It's a 2-year degree, but it's not a terminal degree. Therefore, it's not a qualification of the highest level within your field. So I always make sure that I let people know that so that they understand to look for that. Now, I'll talk about, and I see people are looking for the difference between MFA programs Canada internationally and scholarship opportunities, which I'll totally get at, and the move to online. So within COVID, if we're thinking about this and you're thinking about studio practice or even theater or, music, it's really hard to engage with your professors online. Now, some people are going to want to just go and do it, regardless of sort of the situation. But one of the biggest reasons why people should think about getting the MFA, sometimes you think, well, do I even need it? If you want to teach at the college and university level, you need a terminal degree. And if you want to teach at the college and university level in arts of any sort, you need to have the MFA. But otherwise, what do you need it for? Outside of Calgary, if you look at the art world within Canada, the US, and Europe, there are very few galleries that are showing work by artists that don't have the extra formal education. Now, does that mean that you have to? Absolutely not. You can absolutely have a really successful art career with just a bachelor's degree or no education at all. But usually what you'll see is that sometimes getting your foot in the door, it helps when you have that extra bit behind you. The other thing that's really important about that is the number one reason you go to grad school of any sort is to build a network. The network of professionals that you're going to meet in graduate school are going to be the people that are going to help you professionally for the rest of your career. And so the number one thing that's so important is to create those relationships with your fellow students, with the faculty, with, galleries and arts professionals in the area, like in the town that you're studying. With COVID and moving online, that becomes harder. Is it impossible? No, but it's harder. The other thing is that usually when you're practicing, I'll speak specifically to visual arts, but this applies to other disciplines as well. You're making things and access to resources and shops and expertise, mentors who can help teach you how to, maybe you're a sculptor and you want to incorporate sound in your work, but you don't have any idea how to do that. There's resources on campus that will usually help walk you through that. There's people that run those departments to help show you what to do. And there's equipment you can use. So when you're online or it's distance, those are some of the things that become harder to sort of create or have access to. So when you're thinking about that, I think it's important to weigh those out. How important is that to your practice? How important, how can you build relationships if you're at a distance, whether it's through distance learning or because of online due to COVID? So I want you to think about what it is you need specifically, what's going to help you the most, and make a decision from there about what's best for you. So in terms of when you're looking at this and what to look for, I don't know if any of you have Googled anything in regards to sort of how to get an MFA or how to find a school. It is a jungle of information that is incredibly hard to sift through. But I have a couple tricks, and I'm going to share those with you today. The first thing when you're thinking about this that you need to think about are, what is your goal? What is it you're trying to achieve? I went to school for an MFA literally because when I was in my bachelor's in my 4-year undergraduate, it was always like friends of my parents or whatever would be like, well, what are you going to do with an art degree? And I literally had no answer because I didn't know. I just knew that I enjoyed art. And so I went to school for it because I thought if I was going to spend a lot of time doing something, I was going to do something I loved. And I learned in second year that you could go and get a master's degree. And I didn't know what that meant or what that even looked like. But I started actually saying to people when they asked me, what are you going to do with an art degree? Well, I'm going to go get my master's. And I started sort of parroting that every time someone asked me the question. And surprisingly, they didn't have any follow-ups to that. They were perfect. Oh, you're going to get a master's degree. Oh, okay, great. Sounds good. But what does that mean? And then I found out that with the master's degree, you could teach college and university. So then I started saying, I'm going to get my master's degree so I can teach college and university level education. And that seemed to satisfy people's questions further. Without knowing how I was going to do that, because I was going to school on student loans and I was, scraping by. I had no idea where I would go or how I would get there or pay for it. But I kept saying it. And it eventually it's sort of like, believe it and, keep believing in something until you keep going. But the biggest thing for me was I just wanted something to do afterward. I started my undergrad older. So I'd already gone to college for a bit, took time off, worked for a while before I went to school for art. It was sort of a eureka moment. I woke up and went, oh, art school, that's what I should do, while I'm couch surfing and working as a telemarketer. So when I figured out I should go for art, and that's what I did, then I ended up just going straight into an MFA. A lot of people take time off. There's nothing wrong with that. I think there's pros and cons to both. I actually think it's important to go to graduate school when you kind of have a really good idea about what it is you're creating and what it is you want to do, because you'll never get those 2 years dedicated to making work and creating like any other time in your life. And so I think it's important to really take a deep breath and choose the time that you're going to go. And it's never going to be a perfect time, and you're never going to have enough money. I'll say that right now. So waiting until it's the perfect time is not the smartest thing. You really just have to figure out when you're ready to actually do that in-depth, deep dive 2 years into your practice. So, and yes, an MLit is not an MFA. So you need to actually look at when you're looking at sort of what it is you want to do, you need to look at what's the terminal degree in your field. The terminal degree is going to give you sort of the best foot forward. You have the highest level of education for your field. So whether that's a PhD, like a lot of times in English, sort of all of the humanities, English, geography, history, all of those require PhDs. When you're looking at, some other different disciplines, you're looking for, what's the terminal degree in the field? And a really good way to figure that out is actually go look for job postings for faculty in that field. And it will tell you PhD is required, or it'll tell you what exact sort of designation is required to have that job. That means that you will then have that terminal degree. You can also look it up, but it's hard to find, surprisingly. So when you're looking at that, the other thing you have to think about is what degree do you want? And there's nothing wrong with going to Emily Carr for a Master's of Applied Arts. It all depends on what it is you want to do with it. So make the conscious decision instead of getting caught doing a degree that doesn't get you where you want to, but you can do a degree that may not give you the terminal degree, but it actually speaks to what it is you want to do. And I didn't know what in the world I wanted to do. I had no clue. I literally, I said teaching, but I didn't really think about it. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know how much work it would be or where I would go and do that. And so for me, it was important that I just needed to be in school and focused, but it was also important for me to sort of do a lot of different things when I was in school. And I was lucky in my MFA. I had done some gallery work in my undergrad, and I got a TA-ship working in the gallery in my graduate education, which is what leveraged me working as a gallery director at Claremont. So that all those little things you do in school actually are the pieces you have to put in place to get to where you want to go. And doing different things while you're in school under that umbrella of like experimentation is smart, because you'll realize, oh my God, I hate teaching, or I hate, doing gallery work, or, I love this, I love research, so I really want to go into research, or, all of those different things. You're only really going to figure it out by doing them. And so in exposing yourself and getting yourself involved in a lot of different things. So figure out what your goal is and figure out what degree it is you want, and sort of, hopefully you're leveraging whatever degree it is to work for you. Specialization. If you are a painter, you wouldn't want to go to a school that specializes in new media, sculpture, and printmaking. You're going to want people there that can speak to you about what it is you make. Just like if you're, if you even look up MFAs in theater, there's all sorts of different specializations with them. There's acting, there's theater production, there's all sorts of different things. And so you have to look at the specialization of what it is you want to do, while also keeping an open mind that, maybe you're a painter or an actor right now, but as you go through school, you might find that actually, theater direction is really more up your alley, or you may find that as a painter, you started incorporating new media within it. And so, or you've started experimenting with that now. So you're going to want to look for something that's sort of open-ended versus closed down. And really, there's different types of programs, different types of schools. And some are very specific, and they're discipline specific, where all the painters, they only do painting. All the printmakers, they only do printmaking. And then there's interdisciplinary schools. And I've had this conversation with others before. Back in the 90s and early 2000s, interdisciplinary was a real hot word. And a lot of schools would say they were interdisciplinary because everyone was looking for interdisciplinary programs to go to. But what you found out was a lot of schools actually weren't set up for it. And so there wasn't a lot of interdisciplinary work going on. You would show up there, they said they were interdisciplinary, but really if you were a painter, you could only paint. And then there were schools that were so open-ended, they got rid of all of the designations of like an MFA in painting, an MFA in sculpture, and it just became MFA studio arts. And clearly I'm a student of that era, because my bachelor's is a BFA visual arts, my master's is an MFA studio art. And the places I went were interdisciplinary because I do use multiple mediums. And I knew enough to look for that, thankfully, because I had a very good professor who was helping steer me through that. But one of the things you have to think about is a lot of times what they say and how they actually operate are different. And one of the best ways to figure out whether or not it is interdisciplinary or structured is to look at the work of the graduate students that are currently there. If you see work that has multiple sort of mediums and there's lots of sort of discussion about that, then you can sort of tell that they're open to that sort of dialogue of working through different sort of materials in order to get to your point. So looking at that's important. The other thing is there's a difference between, and this is for all graduate programs, there's a big difference between, especially within the creative fields, studio versus theoretical, or practical applied versus theoretical. So when I was in undergrad, I had no idea if there was a difference or what I should be looking for. Studio programs, or sort of practical applied programs, tend to be really focused on what it is you're doing in terms of the practice. So you're making, you're creating, and it's about the product of that creation. And they will call it creative research. And if they use that term, it may lean on a theoretical program. My undergraduate was a studio-based program. My graduate education was more of a theoretical-based program. What's the difference? Was I still making work in the theoretical-based program? Yes. But a lot of the courses that I was doing were a critical theory. So, and there was a lot of writing involved. So there was much more focus of your work. Your work was mostly worked out, sort of your concepts, and really you were applying theoretical knowledge to what it was you were making. And so that was a big piece for that. So, and I'll show you how you can tell the difference between studio and theoretical programs in a little bit. The other thing is, what are your plans afterward? So, do you have a crystal ball and know your future? No. Sometimes people go into graduate education with an idea. So for instance, they'll say, well, I want to teach, or I really love this subject so much, I just want to immerse myself in it as much as possible. I want to learn. Some people want to go on and do, you know, production. So you want to be an artist and show in galleries, and your big dream is to have a piece in the National Gallery of Canada one day, or to represent Canada at the Venice Biennale. Or maybe, you know, you're a musician and you want to create work and share your work and be part of a national orchestra or a national sort of group that does that. Or you want to be in theater and your dream is to be on Broadway one day. And how do you go from sort of where you are right now to that? And so those are the things that you need to sort of think about, because it makes a difference where you're going. And this is where I get into sort of geography. And within geography, when you look at Canada, US, UK, Europe, there's a difference you're going to see between 1 year, 2 year, and 3 year programs. And specifically, I see a lot of the 1 year programs, specifically in the UK. And I think it's really important that you're aware and you look to see. Normally, MFA programs traditionally have been a 2 year program. So usually master's degrees are 2 years, PhDs are 4, and your bachelor's degree, of course, is usually 4. Some places 3, depending on the Bologna Agreement in Europe. But that's a whole nother topic. When you're looking at how long, so often in the description of the program, it'll say how long, how many years in residence for the program. And they mean sort of like attending classes. Sometimes it'll say 2, but it'll also say how often do people, like what's the normal length that people stay? It'll say 3. Also, it'll say something to the effect of, a lot of programs, it's like 2 years of in-class and studio, 1 year of applied research, which is making work. So anytime it says practical or applied research, it means you're actually making something. Or if it's just research, you're actually studying and writing. So if you're looking at that, you need to see that. So I've seen a lot of programs expand from 2 years to 3, which I think it's just intense. It's a more intensive program. They're in some programs are actually good about it, with the 3rd year actually giving you practical applications in the real world about how to actually like work. There's internships involved. The other is when you're looking at the 1 year, sometimes it's a 12-month or an 18-month program. The number one thing, and I'll just be real honest about this, and not every program is like this, but the traditional model is 2 years, and it's a certain number of credits because it's a certain amount of information that you're supposed to receive from the program in order to qualify for the degree. If it's less than 2 years, you have to consider, how are they getting the amount of information to you? Like, how are you consuming that information in a shorter time frame? So if they've taken 2 years and they've shoved it into 1, are the number of contact hours with your faculty member the same as if you did a 2 year program and it's just a condensed sort of, a condensed version of 2 years, but pushed into 1, which means you're attending classes and reading and doing all that stuff really heavily through that 1 year to make it shorter? Or have they reconfigured their program to make it fit 1 year, 12 months to 18 months? Are you getting the same level of engagement and information and education as somebody who's attending a 2 year or 3 year? And I'll be honest that there's some programs that have cropped up, and I know some of them have been addressed, but some of them have not, that are literally money grabs. And you have to think about it like that. If I'm going to go do a master's degree, that's only going to take me 1 year, where 85% of the schools in the world, it's a 2 year commitment, and I'm going to do this in 1. How are they structuring it so I get the same level of education? And keep in mind that every student is a dollar sign for an institution, nonprofit or not, or private. It's still about tuition dollars and putting those dollars back into the institution to pay everybody. And make sure that you're not just a dollar sign going into a 1 year program that's pushing people through fast in order to, it's about volume, right? Where versus, having that full 2 years worth of education, whether it's in 2 years or 18 months, or even 3, that you're getting what you pay for. And keep in mind, time is money. So, if you're gonna do 1 year, are you making that decision because you want to get it over with and get on with your life? Are you making that decision because you have commitments and you can't take a full 2 years to do it? You have to really consider what it is you need and what's going to be best for you. So with that, the other thing you need to look at is geography. So because the number one reason you should go to grad school is to build a network of people who will help you in your professional life after. And keep in mind, all sorts of people go to grad school and they go on to do all sorts of different things. So regardless of what your end goal is, or if you even know what your end goal is, those people that you meet and have relationships with in your graduate school are really going to be the people that connect you to all of those different places, sort of all those different opportunities outside. So if you know that you are Calgarian, I'm going to use that as an example, or you're Albertan, and you're never going to not be an Albertan or a Calgarian, and this is because of family or responsibilities, you're going to end up here no matter what. You need to think about whether it's good to go away and learn stuff from other places, different viewpoints, different experiences, and bring that back, which there's a benefit to that, or whether you want to actually look at going somewhere and immersing yourself within that community. Because when you are in grad school, you have lots of opportunities to do different things. And those opportunities are usually connected to your school or close to. And so as you build up experience and a network of people, if you stay in the area that you went to school, you can leverage that 100 times more than you could if you went to school, did your 2 years, graduated, and then went home. You literally have lost your network because your network will be around that geographical place. And so it's really hard to leverage your network when you leave it and go back to wherever you were from. So what I often tell people is, when you're looking at your overall goal, a couple of things to consider. If your goal is to be on Broadway, for instance, why wouldn't you go to school in New York or near New York? Because you want to be as immersed in that community as possible to build relationships and build a network of people who are also interested in the same things. If you're looking at visual arts and you want to go to graduate school and your dream is to show your work, have your pieces bought by the National Gallery of Canada, then consider going to an art center. You're not going to go to Saskatoon to get an MFA because you want to be a hot shot in the arts world when you're not surrounded by sort of galleries that are national. Okay, now am I saying that you can't have a high-end career going to Saskatoon? Absolutely not. It's just harder and it's different. So, I'm just saying, do you want to pick the harder road? There's lots of reasons to pick the harder road, but if you want to pave the road as best you can before you even sort of start, choosing to go into, an art center actually makes a lot of sense. So when you look at Canada, you're looking at Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal. I can debate other art centers like Winnipeg. I can debate that. I can debate Calgary. I can even debate Edmonton. But ultimately, if you want to sort of, get immersed in the galleries, get immersed in the community, build that network of people, you're going to want to be somewhere that you're going to want to stay for a little while and leverage your network, and somewhere where the road's a little bit easier paved. And if you want information on if you take the hard road, how to make it easier, we can do other sort of workshops on that. But I think it's important that you think about what your end goal is. And when I say that, you don't know. I always tell people, you got to go for the big dream. And you have to be really be kind to yourself when you take a deep breath and think about, because it's really easy to underestimate what you're capable of. And I think people, if they can get honest with themselves and allow themselves to think about the big dream, and even if it feels outlandish or far-fetched or impossible, if you can think about what your big dream is, I think it will really help direct your path. And whether it's realistic or outlandish, it's really important to kind of keep it in mind and sort of, allow your brain to sort of go to that place and think about that in terms of how you make decisions now. Because you never know what's possible until you're doing things. And honestly, I would have, if someone had told me, years before what I had ended up doing, I would have never believed them. And I feel very, fortunate for what I've done. And other people, like a lot of people say it's luck, it's this. There's maybe an element of that, but really it's about the building blocks of education, network, and education can be like inherent knowledge or structured education, or it can be, or just like sort of living and doing. Your network is your friends, your family, the people you look up to, the people you help, volunteer communities, just your general community. All of those things are building blocks. So as you're building this and you're thinking, okay, well, should I go to graduate school? That's one of your building blocks, but it's only one. An MFA is nothing but a really expensive, pretty piece of paper. Any graduate degree is, any degree is. And so you have to consider, what am I going to do while I'm there to build out what it is I'm hoping to do. So as you go through that, consider geography. So if you're looking at, schools that you're going to pick, where should you be? If you're looking at US schools, first of all, you need to consider how long can I stay after my schooling to leverage my network, which you really should, especially if, you go for the big dream of like, I want to be a hotshot artist showing at the best galleries in North America and Europe. Well, then you're looking at, and I know that's a really sort of white Western viewpoint, because there's a lot of different places and ways to have a practice that are outside of that Western sort of mentality of North America and Europe. And like we can absolutely cover that another time. But I think it's really important that you think about, put yourself geographically where you have the best shot. And so if that's going to be New York, or if that's going to be Los Angeles, or that's going to be, London, that's really, sort of what you have to make a decision. So when you get a geographical idea, it actually helps, because if you have no idea, the options that are out there and the amount of information that's out there is actually really overwhelming. Now I'm going to share my screen again, and I'm going to go through some of this stuff. I'm going to show you. So I actually found this website, which I went to before. Okay. And if you notice, you can see it's just find a master's advice, finding a master of arts, which, I just Googled it. But the information on this particular page is actually really relevant. And it talks about a bunch of different things. And I'm going to go through some of this. So a lot of times people talk about academic requirements or qualifications to get into graduate programming. A lot of MFAs specifically don't require you to have the BFA. They usually require any master's degree or PhD is going to require an undergraduate education. Very rarely have I seen them, like really rarely have I ever seen them not. And often they require a certain level of a GPA. Most programs, I've never seen anything under a 2.0. And a lot of times, you have to be closer to a 3.0 to get in. There are ways around this, however, and we'll get to that in a little bit. And it talks about, sort of all of the different things subject to, and some of this isn't correct, as I'm sure you can probably figure out in terms of, creative arts subjects, countries. So this is where we're talking about the difference. So the MFA originated as a specialized graduate degree in the USA, but a lot of different places in the world also have the MFA as their specific qualification for a terminal degree. You'll see it in the UK, you'll see it in the US, you'll see it in Canada, you'll see it in Commonwealth countries like Australia, and a few other places. Once you get into Europe, it's a little different. And sometimes the way they talk about it is different. For instance, in the UK, they talk about it as a level 7 qualification. So you have to sort of look at what that difference is. There's this here, the European higher education area. It does talk about the different sort of qualifications. They don't tend to use MFA specifically. It's different. So you have to go look and find out. And like I said, if you're going to go to Spain for a graduate degree, but you want to come back to Canada to teach, you need to make sure you have wherever it is you're going to end up. If you're coming back to Canada, you're going to need the terminal degree in your field. So if it's the terminal degree in Spain, that's lovely, but you need a terminal degree in the field in which you're going to be. So that would be Canada, which would be the MFA. So keep that in mind. The other thing that I thought was really interesting in here, sort of the difference between the MFA and the MA. some of that, in terms of an academic degree versus a practice-based degree, the truth is they're both academic degrees. One's more theoretical, and one's more sort of practical, applied, studio-based. Who should study? Really, I don't think you should have to meet a set of qualifications to do that. They do talk about sort of how long it takes, but I spoke to you guys about that. And then in terms of how many credits, this is going to change everywhere, and it is different. So you're going to have to keep that in mind. So that was just like a really quick and dirty sort of explanation on how you can go to graduate school. But one of the things I want to show you for the MFA is there is a neat little place called the College Art Association. So collegeart.org. Now, the College Art Association is a group, you can read about them on this website. And I really suggest you actually write down this website address, because this, as an artist, this is a huge amount of information that is going to be beneficial to you. I'm a member of the CAA, so one of the things that I'm able to access that you might not be able to, and I actually don't know, because when I went in today, I saw that there was a backdoor to access it, but I don't know if it's because I'm actually a member. And so if you want a PDF of what I'm going to show you, you can email us at Elephant Artist Relief Society or elephantartistrelief@gmail.com, and I will send you the PDF of this if you can't access it on the website. But the CAA is basically a group of, it's a membership organization that generally puts together standards and guidelines for academic art programs, specifically within studio or visual arts. They also do talk about MA in arts history. They talk about museum professional, like there's a lot of arts administration courses and degrees now. It also has a lot of this stuff. So just right off the bat, I'm going to show you sort of a couple different things. So the standards and guidelines area of this, and I'm a huge fan of going through this website. It is incredibly helpful. So one of the things that the CAA guidelines, standards and practices, this is beautiful. So right here, right off the bat, here's something you could use if you're an artist. How to write an artist resume. Curriculum vitae for visual artists. Now it's specifically, this one's more for sort of exhibitions. This one is more for applying to academic jobs. But the long CV, which would be the curriculum vitae for artists, versus the short CV, which would be the artist resume, this is helpful in all sorts of applications, whether it's for grants, whether it's for work, whether it's for juries and exhibitions. You can have a shorter CV, but I think it's really important to look at this, the longer CV for visual artists, to give you information that you should be including on the short one. I cannot say enough that I can give you lots of information and I can show you where to find it, but unless you actually read the whole thing and actually read it, you're not going to pick up all the sort of nuance, and because it talks about MLA style and sort of how you list, if your work's been written about or if your work is online, some of that information is buried. So you have to go through it and really look. And I'm going to actually put together another group of information about how to write a resume and those sorts of things. I think it's really important. It also talks about, public artworks, professional practices. It talks about, a lot of people, when they're using animals or humans in their work, they need to understand sort of, there is a research practice around that, specifically about how to actually do that. Guidelines for presenting works in digital format. There's information for art historians, museum professionals. There's also fair use and copyright. Now, this is a US-based organization. There's lots of members from Canada. But there's also lots of information here that is applicable, if not specific law in Canada. It can guide you to how to find some of that information. And there's publications, guidelines. And if you are interested in teaching, I actually think it's important that you look at, there is stuff in here that talks about, it was guidelines for the MFA degree in art and design. So if you're looking at a program that's a one-year program and it's quick and dirty and you're like, I don't know if this is enough, go here and look at what the guidelines are. So this is an accreditation This is a body that grabs accreditation information as well. So every university program has to be accredited, otherwise your degree means nothing. And they can't actually officially legally offer you a degree. So if whatever program they're doing doesn't actually meet the accreditation guidelines, and everywhere whatever the university is, their accreditation body is going to be different. So in Alberta, it's the Alberta government, and so it's the Quality Council of Alberta that actually does the accreditation for Alberta institutions. In terms of art, there is a international group that is the National Schools of and Colleges of Art and Design, NASAD, and they actually accreditate international programs. But then there's also, and I'll show you when I show the Emily Carr one, there's another accreditation body in Canada that is also important. So the reason why I brought you here, besides showing you this, is there is a really nice little trick where the CAA used to put together a publication on graduate programs. And their graduate programs, these are self-reported. So all of the programs and institutions that are listed in their directory have actually filled out the information that goes into their directory themselves. So CAA hasn't written it for them. This is the school has actually written the information that CAA puts in the directory. So you'll get a really good idea about how they describe their program and what they say and what kind of program they are. Because really, in a lot of ways, you have to go by feel and do a little bit of like intuitive reading in a lot of ways. So here, if you're here and you're looking at this, the last time it was published, and it's usually published every 3 years, and I don't know, of course, whether or not they're going to be publishing one this year, but this is, so graduate programs in art history, and it lists the different sort of, this is like arts administration, curatorial museum studies, library science studies. This one, of course, graduate programs, studio art and design, art education, conservation, historic preservation, and film production. So this is the one that I tend to use for MFAs in visual arts. Now I'm able to download this. I don't know if you're going to be able to. Like I said, if you'd like the PDF, I can send it to you. You can also order a paper copy, and it costs money. And from what I can tell, this also, there's some places that I've gone in and I tried to search by school, and it wanted me to pay $1 for every school that I wanted to look up. So this is the graduate program directory, and this is literally just a PDF. Now, what I have done is I've actually gone through, and let me just find it for you. And it may be, I apologize. I just want to make sure I get the one. I have one that's actually, I'll show you how to actually do this. So I have one that's actually a nice PDF here. And I'm just going to stop share and then make sure that I'm actually sharing the right one. Okay, so this is the CAA directory, and I've gone through and I've actually highlighted a few things. So this is basically a graduate degree in arts, traditional path career, and it gives you sort of the broader strokes of why and what and how and the different sort of scope. Now this particular directory, like I said, it's self-reported. You don't have to necessarily be a member to be asked to provide information to this particular directory. They go out and they look for all the different schools that actually have programs and ask them to be part of it. And so it doesn't include all the schools. However, it does include a good number of schools, and it will also show you how to look at the information on a website. A lot of the information about the program is actually really hard to find, but it'll help give you ideas about the kinds of questions you should be asking or looking for answers to in any of the school's publications or on their website to find a program that works for you. So in this particular volume, there's 2 indexes in the back. One lists the schools geographically by state and country, or province or country in terms of like UK, Canada. And this is, like I said, a US-based organization, and alphabetically. So if you're looking for a school specifically, you can look it up alphabetically. And, you know, sort of the information in here, I talked about accreditation, making sure that they're actually, you know, accredited by an organization that oversees it, the type of a degree awarded. And this will give you information, and says some institutions now offer a Doctor of Fine Arts, which is a DFA, which is different than a PhD. So keep that in mind. And it says also called a doctorate or doctoral degree. However, like I said, there's DFAs and there's also PhDs. The big question right now, because they're fairly new in the last 10 years, is do those constitute a terminal degree? At this point, they do not. So, and degrees are just generally, you know, a professional requirement for employment in the visual arts, depending on what it is you're going to be doing. So you're going to be looking through this. Admissions. So it talks about, because the big thing is like, I can say I want to go to school, but how do I actually get in? And really, how do I pay for it? I think the big thing that people worry about is two big things. Am I good enough to go to graduate school? Are they even going to let me in? Stop worrying about it. And I'm going to explain that in a minute. You are good enough just by fact that you make work. Okay. There are so many programs out there that there is one out there that's perfect for you, that you will fit into, that they will want you to be a student. So do not worry about your work being good enough. And I'll get further into that in a bit. The next thing is, do not worry about how you're going to afford it. Stop worrying about that. That you do not worry about that. And I'm going to show you why. Okay. You do not worry. And I know, trust me, I couldn't afford it either. So I understand, but I need you to put that, don't let that be in the front of your thinking. Put that behind to think about later. Okay. Talks about sort of the common requirements. Sometimes some schools, when you're applying, they need not only a minimum GPA, but they also need the GRE, which is basically like an SAT, but it's a graduate record examination. So it's a course that you can take a course or you can just go right for the GRE. There's usually places in Calgary you can go right for it. It's a timed proctored exam that you take that just basically gives you a number like an SAT score that states, you know, your qualifications as to whether or not you're going to be successful in a graduate program. Some schools require it, some of them don't. All schools that are outside of Canada that you apply to, you will be considered an international student. 99% of the schools that you're going to be an international student at, they're going to ask for a TOEFL, a test of English as foreign language. You do not, as a Canadian speaking English, if your degree was given to you in English, you do not have to write the TOEFL. You don't actually have to write that exam. You just have to contact the admissions department of the school you're applying to. You speak to them and they will actually waive that requirement as long as your degree was taught to you in English. If you're going to a school in Spain and it is a Spanish language degree, they teach in Spanish, you're going to have to prove that you can, you know, you understand Spanish, so you'll have to write a language test. I'm trying to think if there's any other places, like of course, wherever they speak or teach in a different, like in Germany, there's a lot of places that you have to pass a German test in order to actually be, to get into the program. But I'm trying to think if there's any others that besides other language. Oh, the other thing is if you studied in Quebec and say you went to the University of Quebec, not Concordia or McGill, or even in McGill maybe, and it was a French language degree, you were taught in French, you may have to do the TOEFL for an English language school in the US or the UK, generally not in Canada. You don't have to do the TOEFL. It's very strange. But just so you know. In addition to that, and just so you know, I can't see questions. So if somebody has a question, if Jackie or someone can let me know. In addition to that, so, you know, there's residency requirements, there's courses of study, there's how long or how many their courses are in terms of average class size. You know, a lot of people when they're looking for schools, they're just looking for, how do I choose? You don't even get to the point of like, how do I know which one's good? I'm going to tell you about which one's good. Now, a lot of schools right now, if people are looking at going to school next fall, even not knowing what's happening with COVID, you are looking at applications that are going to be due December and January or February. But most of your applications are going to be due around January 15th. Having it be sort of mid to late October, or you're actually kind of late. So you need to identify schools pretty quickly if you're looking to go to school next fall to decide who you want to apply for. I generally say that you should apply to 6 schools. And schools, the application fees range anywhere from $190 to about $150. That's on average. Average, they're about $100, $110. So considering that, you'd be out $600 if you're applying to 6 schools. but I really do think that you should apply for more than one, definitely. You should apply to at least 2 that you really want to go to. You should apply for one that you would be termed your safe school, and how you can define safe however you want, whether it's close to home or, you know, you have friends that are going there or something else. And then I'd like you to make sure that you apply to a dream school, because I think it's really important to sort of look at that and push yourself. Like, for instance, if I was going to go do a PhD, I would apply to Harvard, even though I might not actually, you know, get in, just specifically because, you know, it's a dream school for me. So in addition to that, there's different ways you can read through this stuff. Like I said, I can totally share this. When you're looking at it, as you start narrowing down the schools that you're looking for, you're going to want to actually look at the faculty. Tuition, like I said, don't worry about it and don't even look at the tuition. The most important part to look for is financial aid. You're going to want to see terms such as tuition remission. You're going to want to see things like fellowships, assistantships, and stipends. Those are the terms you're going to be want to look for. This talks about different types of degrees, what kind of masters there's out there, for instance, like Master of Design, Master of Architecture, and you're going to want to make sure that if you're going to be doing those, are they a terminal degree, or are you going to have to go to school more? So as we get into this, I'm going to show you what this looks like. So the first one, we'll look at the first one, and this is Alfred, and this is just alphabetical. And so I'm going to show you how to read these, okay? And like I said, you don't necessarily need to use this book, but this will give you a really good idea of what it is you're looking for online for other sort of schools or programs. So right off the bat, this is a US program. Okay, it's in New York. It's actually a really good program. A lot of students from Calgary go to Alfred for their graduate degree. So it's a private university, nonprofit corporation. So what does that mean? Most private institutions, they're not state run. So University, UCLA, UC California, like U of C, University of California has multiple campuses: Irvine, Santa Barbara, Los Angeles, San Diego, Santa Cruz. But it's a state system, and it's not unlike the California State University, Long Beach, or California State University, San Francisco, or like there's different Cal States. In Alberta and in Canada, they all tend to be sort of provincial. However, there's differences. So in Canada, we're funded by the government for our education. In the US, state programs and state schools are funded by the state. But then there's also programs and schools that are accredited and approved by the state, but are not necessarily funded as much as state programs are. So Alfred is a really good example of a university that is not a state associated school in New York, but it's a nonprofit and it's a private institution. So like CalArts, there's not a lot of private institutions. The only private institutions you really see in Canada is like the, Visual College of Art and Design, which has an outfit in Calgary now. There's also, I believe it's there's VCAT in Vancouver, and there's also another one in Vancouver. And usually you can tell them in Canada because their tuition's about $40,000, or it's some astronomical amount. When you're looking at that, you really have to look at the level of education you're getting. And the number one thing when you're considering in Canada private versus public schools is what are their students, what's the benefit of paying more? Because unless their students are going into jobs right off the bat, why would you pay more for that? Because the specializations that they have are often represented in public schools. So why would you do that? In the US, it's different. In the US, yes, they are more expensive than state schools by far. However, how they operate and how you can afford them is a completely different thing. Now, you have to be really clear about why you're picking the school you're picking. So be aware if it's a private versus a public. Private's always going to be more expensive, and there's pluses and minuses to both, and you have to weigh it out and make sure it makes sense for you. And I can go on and on about that, but I will just stop there. In the US, you're going to find a lot of schools that people go to that you're you know, for instance, if there's artists you follow that you absolutely love, you're going to find that some of them have gone to private schools like Cal Arts, or, you know, trying to think of other ones, Rhode Island, you know, RISD, that's a really good example. Those are private institutions, but a lot of times there's artists that you'll follow and really like that are actually public. So when you're looking at that, you have to look at accredited. Who are they accredited by? Make sure, like the National Association of Schools of Art and Design, for instance, ACAD here in, or AU Arts here in Calgary, is accredited by NASAD, the National Association of Schools of Art and Design. And often wherever a university or school is located, there's going to be a regional accreditation body. So like the Western states have a accreditation body, New York State Association of Colleges and Schools, New York State Education Department, those are all, and the Middle States Commission of Higher Education, those are all regional accreditation bodies. Degrees awarded, master's degree, concentrations in. So this is the other thing. You might really want to go to a school. Let's say you've heard of Alfred and you're like, oh, that's where I want to go. They really only have concentrations in ceramics, digital media, glass, and sculpture. So if you're a painter, this would not be an ideal school for you. And I hope that makes sense. So always make sure you're looking at the concentrations. And a concentration does not necessarily mean it's a box and you can't, and once you go in making glass, that's all you can make. It might be, but it also might just be sort of material and media that they specialize in, but that you can work sort of across those boundaries. And how to figure that out is really looking at the work that's made from the graduate students that are in the program and how they describe themselves, which brings me to this next spot. So this paragraph right here, and sometimes it's short, sometimes it's long. This is a really good indication of what kind of program you're looking at. This paragraph is written by the school about what their program is about. And usually what they write here, you won't see show up in any brochure or on their website. It's like somebody sat down, and usually it's the faculty in charge of the MFA program who writes this paragraph. And so it's a real kind of honest snapshot of what they think the institution's about. And how they talk about themselves is either going to give you a good feeling or a not great feeling. And when you're sort of overwhelmed by all the schools you're looking at, sometimes following your gut when you read this paragraph is actually really helpful to help you identify schools that you're like, yeah, I really like that. Or you're like, oh, that doesn't sit right. So this one in particular, the School of Art and Design, is a growing community of artists, designers, and students dedicated to the teaching, creation, research, exhibition, and communication of fine art. Encouragement, support, and challenge are the foundation of the MFA program, which requires specific coursework as well as an attitude of openness and willingness to risk. After graduation, the lines of communication remain intact and graduates can expect to receive continuing career assistance. That is a real inclusive sounding description. And so that's going to give you the feels in a different way or not. And so reading that that tells me that it's balanced in terms of the creation, the research, communication sounds a bit more studio focused, encouragement and support, willingness to take risks, open attitudes. So that's really kind of interesting. I'm like, this is interesting. I think I want to look at this a little bit further. Usually I read these with a student who's looking at graduate programs before I have them do deep dive research, because when you have no idea and there's 350 schools out there, you can narrow it down by geography and start looking at those schools that are available in that geographic area. And then you can start looking at, okay, there's going to be schools you know the name of, there's going to be schools you don't. Read this paragraph, see what it says, make sure it has the concentration you want, make sure it's going to give you the degree you're after. Then once you identify, I would say about 10 schools that you're a little bit more interested in, then you're going to get into a further deep dive on how to research them, which is looking at the work that's made by the graduate students. And one of the number one things that's integral to your application is researching the faculty that work there. But we'll get to that in a second. So this one, it says, and these are all set up exactly the same. So it gives you the information on the top and sort of their description. Then the admissions deadline for fall is January 15th. Do not pay attention to how many applications they have received, because a lot of times that includes applications that weren't full. When I was doing graduate admissions, we would get a whole bunch of applications that were the paper application, but not the portfolio. So a lot of times when people are applying to schools, they'll put the application in, but they won't pay the fee and they don't include their portfolio. When schools do a count of their applications, it sometimes includes those applications that weren't fully finished. So when you see that there was 190 applications received, maybe there's only 50 that were complete. So then when you're looking at how many were accepted, 17, and don't be afraid of that number, and I'm going to show you why in a second. It's really about fit. And this also goes back to whether or not your work is good enough. It is. So just hang on. And then students enrolled, 34. So that's in both years. So if you look at applications accepted, 17, and you times it by 2, if it's a 2-year program, that should be how many students are enrolled in the next line. If that doesn't make a lot of sense, like let's say they say there's 50 students or 60 students, they've enrolled 20, and it says like they accepted 20, but the amount of students that are enrolled is 60, and it's a 2-year program, that should only be 40 students. Why are there 60? So there's 20 students in that program that should have graduated that are currently enrolled. Why? Are they having a hard time finishing? What does that mean? It's just another thing to kind of look at as you get deeper into this. Then it says what the requirements are. So it requires an undergraduate degree. As you can see, it'll take a BA or a BSA. The GPO, they want a 3.0, a TOEFL for 40 students, the transcript, letters of recommendation, a resume, statement of interest, personal statement, and examples of personal artwork, and an artist statement. That's actually a lot of statements. A lot of places will either just want a personal statement and an artist statement. They won't necessarily want a resume as well. Some of them do. But what you do is when you're actually looking at this and you're going to apply, I really suggest you write down on a piece of paper what the school is, when the deadline is to get it in, and all of the different things that they require you to have in your application, so that you make sure that you are checking off all of those boxes to make sure your application is complete. Like I said, when they say how many applications they received, a lot of those aren't complete applications. So you have to take that into account. Okay, so then as you go down, courses, class size, honestly, you know, in terms of class size, unless they have 500 graduate students, which some places do, only then would I look at class size. You know, when you're looking at 17 students accepted and only 34 enrolled, you're basically, if that's over 2 years, you're going to be in a class with about 5 to 10 students. So when you're looking at this full-time residency requirement, that's 2 years. Maximum number of years. So they want you done in 2 years no matter what. Average number of years is 2. So you only have 2 years to do this degree no matter what happens. Now, sometimes you can, of course, there's always exceptions to the rule, however. And then it'll talk about what you have to finish while you're there in order to get the degree. Often it includes the written thesis, a solo exhibition, and when it says a critique of thesis work, documentations of the thesis work, oral defense of thesis work, it's really specifically, most graduate degrees require an oral defense of your thesis. And you don't even need to worry about that going into school. That's something to worry about when you're there, and they'll help you through it. So then it talks about the number of students in residence. It lists the different faculty. This is where you would go through and actually, when you get serious about whether or not you're gonna go to look at applying to the school, then you're gonna go and look at these faculty, Google them, look at the work they're making. Is there anybody that sort of jives with you? And that brings me to my next point. So why did I say it doesn't matter? Like, do not worry if you're good enough, because you are. The fact that you're even looking at graduate school, you're good enough. Trust me, there's a school out there for you for sure. When you're looking at schools, you need to decide, you have to find the school where you fit. So like the example of, if you're a painter, you're not going to go to a school that only specializes in new media and sculpture, because there's going to be no one there. One of the biggest reasons to go to graduate school, like I said, was to build your network. One of the first places you do that, yes, amongst the other students for sure, but with your faculty. When you're applying, it's incredibly important when you are writing your statement of purpose, or sometimes your statement of interest, depending on how they ask about that. And I can answer questions once you get down into applying regarding what the difference is between those and what that has to include. But when you're looking at that, one of the things that should always be included in that statement of purpose or statement of interest is at least 2, but preferably 3 faculty members from that school whose work you're interested in. And part of the paragraph that you speak about this is, I'm hoping to work with Sarah Blood, as her work, and I don't know anything about Sarah Blood's work, so I'm going to make this up. Her work investigating sort of like identity politics within issues of objectification, or whatever sort of theoretical place your work exists in. Say you're interested in identity, her work with identity through her medium is something that really speaks to me, and I'm hoping to work with Sarah to learn more about how she does XYZ. When you identify those faculty, first of all, it should be something that you've looked at all the faculty's work and you do find work that speaks to you. It doesn't have to be the same medium. It doesn't have to be the same concept, but there's something about the work when you look at it that you're like, oh, I really like that. I want to know more. If you name that faculty by name and sort of say what it is you're hoping, like why you're interested in them, because when you're a graduate student, you're going to have a graduate advisor. You're going to have more than one. And what they do is, so how they decide who gets in is they sit in a room and they look at, or now, digitally, they'll actually project this. A lot of work you have to actually upload into SlideRoom, which is an online digital portal for images. But what they do is they sit together in a group and they also do it individually. A lot of times they go in individually and they score it individually, but the final review of who gets in as a student is actually done in a group setting. Keep in mind also, the graduate students get a vote about what students are getting accepted. So the graduate students usually get a 0.5, so half a vote. It only has half weight, where the faculty get 1 vote, 1 full vote. And you have to hit a certain threshold to see whether or not they're going to accept you. If you have identified faculty that make work that is like yours, whether it's in medium or concept, or you resonate somehow, your work resonates with theirs, they are going to choose you to be part of that program because there's someone who's going to work with you. If you're an artist who works with identity and memory in the body, and you apply to a school that does formalist painting, they're not going to accept you because your work is not in relationship to the work that they focus on. So if you're into memory, identity in the body, and you're applying to a school that's formalist, whether it's in painting or sculpture, there's no one there who can speak to you about your work and your practice who's going to be really helpful. And unfortunately, the reality is that a lot of times this is an ego project, okay, for faculty. Faculty, and I say that as a faculty member having been on, these things. Basically, what you're looking at is faculty members get to choose the students they're advising. They're not necessarily assigned. So when they're sitting in that group and deciding who gets in, it's usually a faculty member that, 1, their ego's been stroked because you mentioned them by name. 2, your work resonates with them because it looks kind of like theirs or is about stuff that theirs is about. So they're like, oh, I would love to have a mini me. And I know that sounds gross and possibly untrue, but I'm telling you 99% of the time, this is the reality. And this is me having I've sat on just under 20 graduate program reviews for admissions, but I've been involved in the discussion of this for over 50 schools. So when they sit there and they decide this, it really does become an ego project. So, a faculty member will be like, yeah, I want them. And so if a faculty member actually puts up their hand, and a lot of times it'll be like, is anyone interested in this student? That's one of the questions that they ask in the evaluation. Who's interested in this student? If you get 1 or 2 faculty members that put their hands up, who would be your advisor, then they're more likely to offer you admission. So when you're looking at where am I going to get in, it's really about, does your work match what they're making? And are there faculty members, and you don't have to match everybody, are there 2 to 3 faculty members there who you align with and who you think would be helpful to you in terms of, making work and having them advise you as a student in a graduate program? That's really what you're looking for. If you're applying to a school that has nobody on faculty who makes work that's interested in the things you're interested in, they are not going to admit you. because there's nobody there who would be your advisor. So you can be the most profound painter in North America, and that school will not admit you because there's no one there to be your advisor. And now they may think that, you know, you could even make a case that, oh, like somebody's there that's got information or knowledge or experience that can help me. Think about it in terms of the mini me. If there's no one there who's going to feel good teaching you, they're not going to accept you, which brings us to another point. Faculty and student work, and faculty who put work out into shows that is not representative of the work they actually make, but is actually more representative of the work their students make. That's an actual thing that happens. And there's ethics guidelines at every institution about that, but it happens. So if you realize that that's an actual problem, that universities have had to write full program disclosures about faculty stealing the research of their students, and I'm sure if you just Google that phrase, you will find many examples of such. And the fact that every institution actually has a policy about this, you have to understand that there's a whole mini-me system going on. And so people that are actually interested in having you there as a student because you're going to make them feel good about what it is they do, and you're going to look to them for guidance and help and information, then they're going to want to actually admit you to that program. Is it always as sick and gross as how I'm describing it? No, of course not. You know, 95% of the time, it's not like that at all. It's people that are actually in a profession where they want to give back and they want to share their knowledge. But keep in mind, there is always that bit. And if you don't fit, you'll never get in. Whether you're, prolific and amazing in what it is you do, if they don't actually have someone that matches up with you, they won't admit you. So this is what I mean by it's not about how good you are. It's really about finding your fit. And so when you find your fit, it's really important to do the work to make sure that, you found faculty that actually, you're interested in, that match you. Are the graduate students also making work that's sort of in line? And you don't have to match them. It's more of, will your work fit into that group? And if it doesn't, you can still try, but honestly, you got to think about where's the best fit. So that's what you're looking at when you're looking at faculty. As you go through this, I know most of you are probably thinking, I can't afford this. Why in the world aren't we talking about that? How in the world am I going to get scholarships to get in? Here's how I'm going to say, when you're looking at this, if that's your number one worry, let me help you with that right now. You skip down to the financial information about the school, and the first thing you do is actually do not look at the tuition, okay? Because the tuition, you're going to look at it and you're going to throw up in your mouth and think, I can't afford $22,000, and that's for 1 year. That's 1 year. So a full MFA, this is based on 2015, I think was the last time this was reported, even though it's a 2017 update. This means that it's about $45,000 US that you require for tuition. That's not actual reality at any school in the US, particularly the financial aid. When it says types of aid available, the things you want to see, and this is a good example because I don't see it straight off. You want to see tuition remission. Those are the first two words you really want to see. However, you also want to see stipend, teaching assistantship, research assistantship. And here's the next one that's really important. Tuition waiver, which means they waive tuition, is offered to all graduate students, period. See that? Guess what? Every single graduate student there doesn't pay tuition. That is what that means, okay? Tuition and full stipend awarded to 35 students in the previous academic year. 35 students? Wait a second, how many students are there? Is that everybody? Let's go back up and look. Students, how many students are in residence? 35. Not one of them is paying tuition, but wait, there's more. When we go back here, it says tuition and full stipend. What does that mean? Stipend is money they give you every month or every semester just for being there. So they're paying you to go to school. Do you understand? And you're, why? Why would they do that? How are they making money? I thought this was a money-making operation. What about the schools in the UK that are like 1 year and it's like a money grab? Here's the thing. In higher education, faculty, tenured faculty, and we'll go up and we can talk about this, and this is a whole nother issue. But if you look at this, number of faculty is 46. Tenured or tenured track faculty. These are permanent faculty. 13 men, 17 women, which also, by the way, when you think about this in terms of gender disparity, you know, you got to think about like whether or not this actually makes sense for you. But then part-time or adjunct lecturers, these are people that aren't tenure track, that aren't permanent with the institution, but generally they're on contract. These people, they teach regularly. Full-time contractual. So these would be people that come in, maybe they're on a contract for 2 years, but they might not be there for long periods of time. So you have to be careful with that. But the thing that's important is all faculty usually have a union contract. The union contract stipulates basically that anyone teaching courses must be paid a certain amount. This is most union contracts. If you look at union contracts in any sort of industry, you're going to see sort of the same things, that how much everyone gets paid is very stipulated by the contract. Higher education, universities is no different. So the faculty state that if you're teaching a course and you have this many contact hours with students teaching them, that you are to be paid X. Well, then how do graduate students teach or assist teaching or assist research? How do they get around that? Because really the whole bread and butter is student and student numbers, particularly undergraduate students. So if an undergraduate student is paying $10,000 to $20,000 a year to attend the program, that money is going to pay for the university, pay for staff and salaries. If you have a graduate student who's teaching a course to undergraduates, and if you go to large universities, you'll see, you know, undergraduate students in 400 students in a class or 200 students in class, like those big lectures and big auditoriums. They make money off of every student that's in a seat, but they don't have to pay the instructor because it's taught by a graduate student. How they get around that, okay, because of course faculty would be upset. How you get around that is you waive their tuition and you pay them a stipend. So this is why you're seeing this with institutions for graduate level study. And honestly, like, this is why I say don't worry about it. Basically because you have to think about it in terms of if it's a graduate school. So when I was at Claremont's a graduate university. It only does masters and PhDs. There were no undergraduate classes because it didn't teach them. They didn't offer tuition remission or stipends like this or tuition waivers because there were no undergraduate classes to teach. So the graduate students could only get teaching experience or a teaching assistantship at a partner institution, but that wouldn't waive the tuition or give the graduate students money, because there was no sort of back and forth, because really it comes down to what's in it for them. What's in it for a university to waive tuition for a student? Well, they're getting free labor, and it's free labor that doesn't go up against the faculty contract, so the faculty don't complain. This is what it is. So a lot of these schools, you're going to find that there's tuition waivers or tuition remission, which is the same thing. And it's usually always tied, to assistantships. And so you got to keep that in mind. And you'll see that in every single one. So Boston University, here we go. It's a private university, nonprofit. Now the privates, sometimes they won't have the whole assistantship or tuition waiver. All of the publics do. So any state university in the US is going to have this system set up. So when you're like, how do I afford to go for an MFA? This is how. You don't pay tuition. It's a tuition waiver because you're willing to do an assistantship. And so that's what you're looking for. So as you go through this again, you know, like I'm just looking at all of this: tuition aid remission, stipend, work study. Now, if you're not an actual, if it's in the US and you're not an American, you cannot get work study. It's a federal program. In Canada, you can. But you can be and do an assistantship, be a graduate teaching assistant in the US as a non-US citizen. Same with this also takes place in the UK. You'll see this there too. You know, fellowships awarded. You have to look at like how many students are there, who's getting what. Stipends are outside of assistantships. They're literally just money to be there. A lot of times you'll see tuition remission and an assistantship, but you won't see a stipend. When you get stipends, that's good money. Just for the record, so when I was in school, this is how I went in California. I couldn't afford it. I had tuition remission, and I had 3 classes that I was an assistant, a graduate teaching assistant for, which is why my tuition was a scholarship just given to me. I was being paid with 3. I was getting $1,800 a month. So outside of not having to pay for tuition, I was being paid $1,800 a month to be a teaching assistant. So when you think about how do you go to school, that's how. In addition, there's scholarships you can apply for or that you might qualify for outside of that. So that's more money that you can go after, if that makes sense. And a lot of people, they don't know this. And, you know, it's funny because when I've spoken to people that have gone to school outside of Canada or gone to school or been involved with the education system sort of like outside of here, everyone's aware, like this is how it works. And we're not sure why this information doesn't get out and people don't realize this, but this is the case. Now, let me look at this in terms of, let me look at a private school. So we're going to look at CCA. This is, it's in Oakland, California College of the Arts. And I think it's this one. So CCA. So California College of the Arts. It's in Oakland, outside it's in San Francisco. It actually is over the bridge though. Private art school. Doesn't even say nonprofit, just says private. So keep that in mind, okay? And then again, we go through here, it's accredited, what the concentrations are, master's degree, artist books, ceramics, digital media, drawing, fiber arts, glass, metals, multidisciplinary, painting, performance, photography, printmaking, public art, sculpture, sound, and video. Again, it says multidisciplinary, but you have to look, what are the students actually making? If you're looking for a multidisciplinary program, look to see that the work is actually multidisciplinary. Otherwise, there might be barriers to actually making work like that. This one states it specifically, which makes me wonder, do they have a whole program or discipline that's called multidisciplinary? And if that's the case, is there a barrier for those students to be able to do other things? So then as it goes through, this is their paragraph about who they are. This is going to give you an idea about how they describe themselves, what kind of, you know, what their priorities are. And it says extensive studio practice is essential to the program. This is a studio-based program, not a theoretical-based one. Students have access to facilities, and it talks about the different facilities they have access to. That's sort of important. Again, the application fee is only $70. That's actually pretty low. Again, here we go. We're looking at this. So average class size, course of study, maximum number of years for residency is 2. How many students they have? 128. Okay. Now let's look at their finances. So financial information. So they're saying that it's per credit, and this is important. See how it says, oh, it's only $1,578 per credit. Most courses are 3 credits. Often, full-time course load is anywhere between 9 and 12 credits. So now you're looking at like, you know, $15,000 for a semester of 12 credits. And usually there's 2 semesters in a year. So this would be about $24,000 a year. So you got to kind of look at how they say this. Financial aid available, tuition aid remission, stipend, guaranteed loan. That is for only students that reside in that country. Guaranteed loan is actually, when you start seeing those things, that means that their students rely on student loans. Teaching assistantships, work study program, again, that's a federal program in the US. The following awards are available. All of college honors. So these, now they're listing what their scholarships are, okay? So then funds available for graduate student travel, yes. Fellowships are available to students at all levels. Assistantships are available to students at all levels, full-time. Now it doesn't actually talk about how many students were awarded. And when it doesn't talk about those things, you have to keep in mind that, and they're talking about guaranteed loans, and they're talking about work study, which are federal programs. That generally means you're going to have a hard time. This is not going to be one of those places where they're going to cover your tuition. It says tuition aid remission and stipend and teaching assistantship, but I'm going to warn you that a number of their students, especially if they have, what was it, 128 students, some of those are paying full price. And if you remember up at the top, it said it was a private art school. Doesn't say nonprofit. So they're in the business of making money. And it's just, it's not bad or good. It just is, you know, and just be aware of it. So the next one I'm going to look at, I'm going to show you Emily Carr. And like I said, this is alphabetical in here, but you can find. So here's Emily Carr. studio-based art, media, and design. Public university, nonprofit corporation, accredited by the AUCC, which is a usual accreditation body in Canada. Master's degree, concentrations. So they talk about this. So they offer a Master of Design, and they offer the Master of Applied Arts, 21-month resident program. So this is why, again, you know, I say that it's really important to look at this. Then they offer the Master of Applied Arts low residency, which is a 28-month program. So this is for students, and if you look at this, and a lot of people look at this, I've seen so many people look at MCAR for a graduate program. And it's absolutely great because you can do some of it at a distance. When it says low residency, it means you don't have to actually be in Vancouver. It means you have to be there a little bit, but you can take most of your classes actually online or at distance. But what is it you're going to school for? What's your goal? The number one thing that you go to grad school for is to build your network. And if you're not there, it's harder to build a network. And so this goes back to like, why are you doing this? What's your goal? So keep that in mind. Applications received, applications accepted, students enrolled. Now this is an important one, okay? Like I said, applications received, there's probably some in here that aren't full applications. Applications accepted, they accepted 67, but only 39 students enrolled. When you see a big disparity between how many were accepted and how many enrolled, there's a couple things that are happening. One is that they didn't offer financial aid awards, so students couldn't afford to go there. So even though they got accepted, they ended up not going because A, they didn't have the money, B, they got in somewhere else, or C, you know, it ended up not being a fit in the long run. So when you see that disparity, look at that. Talks about the required bachelor's degrees, talks about your GPA, talks about what it is you have to do in order to get in. In addition, okay, course of study, full-time, 2-year, talks about low residency. And it talks about, and this is interesting, so it talks about one of the things in order to finish your master's degree is a 12-credit graduate internship. I actually think that's great. More network you build, more experience you get while you're in school, better your chances are for doing something when you're done. So then it lists faculty, it lists resources and special programs. So this is one you should always look at as well. Private studios are available with limited hours for all. That means you do not have 24-hour access to your studio, but perhaps you can only access your studio from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. And then other ones you're gonna see, and I'll show you this in other spots, it'll say semi-private studios available, which means you're sharing your studio. Then you're going to see common studios available. I had a girlfriend that went to get her MFA at the Slade in London, and she was shocked to find out when she got there that the studio space that they were given was actually a really large room that they were all put in. So there was 20 students to one of these large rooms that they all had to kind of stake a piece of wall, and that was their studio space. So think about what it is you want, think about what you're getting for what you're investing, and consider what it is you need to do your work. A lot of people I know that make work, or they require a space that's really dedicated and private, so keep that in mind. And it says here students are required to have a laptop computer. It's just I find this interesting how they start listing these things. Financial information, again, ignore tuition, because how they break it out never makes sense. MCAR is one of the worst ones for how they break it out. It's always way more than what they say it is because of how they do it. And they say it's determined per semester, but they don't talk about how many credits you should be having, because it's actually credit based. Financial aid, types of aid available: teaching assistantship, research assistantship, entrance scholarships available. This basically means, so assistantships are available to first-year students and second-year students. It doesn't say anything about tuition remission. So you're going to be paying tuition no matter what, but it sounds like they're going to be paying you. Any teaching assistantship or research assistantship is always a paid position. What you're paid for it is, it depends, but it doesn't necessarily automatically qualify you for tuition remission. Usually that'll say. Now, sometimes in Canada, I found that schools that aren't directly affiliated provincially, so like University of Alberta, University of Calgary, UBC, MCAR, ACAD, like NASCAD, OCAD, all of those, they're funded provincially, they're public institutions, but how they operate and their union contracts with their faculty are different. So you will find teaching assistantships, but they won't give you tuition remission. So they might do partial, but it won't be full. And so these are the things that you're looking for. And a lot of times it's information you can't get. You can contact and ask directly, but your question needs to be really direct. Otherwise they won't answer it. What else? So the next one, let's look at, we'll look at Concordia. I'm just trying to make sure that I cover Canadian schools so that you can see it. So here's Concordia. Accredited Canada and the province of Quebec. I like how they just leave that really open. They're not specific at all, which fine, as long as you make sure they are accredited. Now, I happen to know Concordia is accredited, so I don't have a question about it. But if it was a school in the US that I wasn't familiar with, and it just said US and state of New York was the accrediting body, I would question it and start to actually look a little bit more, because that wouldn't, there's a lot of schools out there that actually look at Trump University, you know, schools that will give you a degree, but that aren't actually a real degree. So master's degree, concentrations in, here's the paragraph about what they're about. Okay, so that's going to give you an idea about who they are. The admissions, their deadline for fall, January 20th. And then applications received, 218, accepted, 51. How many enrolled? 43. Okay, so they lost some, but not a ton, but that's good to know. Talks about what it is you need to get in, course of study, maximum number of years is 4. Full-time residence requirement, you have to be there for 2, but the average number is 3. I happen to know this is a 3-year program. And how they sort of state that isn't real clear, but this is a 3-year program. So I always look at this so that you know how many years or how much time is actually required. And if it's whatever the average is, generally tends to be how long the program actually is. It says you can do it in 2. I'm not sure. I'm going to guess that there's a whole bunch of courses that you need for your degree that they wouldn't even offer that you could take it into. So you couldn't even force it into 2. They're only going to offer them every so often, which means you're going to be forced to do it over 3 years. So then when you look at this, the degree requirements, what it requires, 2 years of residency are required before the delivery of a graduate exhibition film project. You have to complete the 2 years before you do that, which means that's something that takes place in the 3rd year. And I don't like how schools that have gone to a 3-year program aren't really clear about that. Some of them aren't, some of them are. So then when you look down here, here's another one. Private studios are available. Semi-private studios are available. Students have the opportunity to exhibit their work. It also talks about sort of like the different types of partnerships they have. And one of the things that's interesting is if you're a media artist and you're looking at Concordia, this should make you feel really good, okay? Because they clearly have put a lot of effort and time into creating partnerships with organizations that sort of support that type of work. And if you're a analog painter, that wouldn't mean that much to you, but then make sure that there's still space in their program for that type of work. You know, make sure that you fit. It's really about the fit, the faculty, make sure you fit. Program opportunities, I think it's important. I'm just going through like different areas in the book of things to look for, and these are things to sort of deep dive in once you get a little bit, you know, once you kind of, these are the, you know, there's about 20 schools I'm kind of interested in, you know, geographically, and then I'm going to whittle it down to, I'm going to read their information. Maybe there's only 10 I really like, you know, and I found 8 schools that have faculty that I'm really into. Okay, I can't afford to do $600 worth of application fees. Let's say I can only do 4. Let me find the 4 that are going to be the best. And these are some of the things to look at to sort of narrow that down. They have exchange programs, formal relationships, extracurricular opportunities, other special programs. Those are the things to look for. Other campus resources. And this is where you're going to find under other campus resources, where you're going to find information about housing. And they're going to talk about whether or not you have access to residence. A lot of schools don't allow their graduate students to use residence. Some of them do. Some of them have graduate specific residence. So if that's important to you, that's where you find that information. And then down here, tuition, again, like I said. And the other thing, when it says state residence and out of state, when it's in Canada, it's, instead of using the term state when you read it, think province. So it would be like provincial residents. So people that reside in Quebec, it's only $4,000. People that reside outside of Quebec, it's $9,200. And then international students on top of that, even though you don't have to worry about that, it's $19,000. Financial aid, tuition aid remission. That's what you're looking for. Teachers, teaching assistantships, research assistantships, work study. Work study is always a federal program. Assistantships, fellowships and awards are available to students. And then it says for more information, but do you notice how they don't say how many students actually receive those awards? In the thing that every school fills out, that actually is there for them to fill out. They've made the decision not to fill that out. It's a question. I don't know. I actually don't know the answer to this. Right now, I don't know whether or not Concordia gives all of its students financial aid or whether some of the students receive it. It's a question I would ask, and I would ask a pointed question specifically. And then I'm going to show you one more, and then I'll go back so I can actually see if there's any questions and such. So I'm actually, because people tend to like to stay close to home, I'm going to look at the University of Alberta. If I can find it. 194. Okay, so University of Alberta, university, nonprofit. It's funny, public university, nonprofit. So concentrations. I happen to know U of A, one of the things they're really well known for, and a lot of schools will have things they're known for, is really well known for printmaking. It's one of the best schools in Canada to go for printmaking. So if you're a printmaker, this is something you should look at. And usually you can find what, if you are a sculptor or you are a, whatever you are, you can kind of find which schools are known for certain things based on the faculty that they have there. So if there's artists who you follow, who you love their work, look and see where they went to school, and go back to that school and sort of look and see what information they have. It'll help you understand, and sometimes you can just inherently know who's known for what just from word of mouth, but that's one of the ways you can figure it out. So they're talking about what their concentrations are, and then it says what degrees they offer. They offer an MDes in industrial design and visual communication design, and a Master of Fine Arts in drawing and intermedia, painting, printmaking, or sculpture, which means you will graduate with a degree that says Master of Fine Arts in drawing and intermedia, or you'll graduate with a degree that says Master of Fine Arts in printmaking or sculpture. Now, why is that a good thing or a bad thing? If you're looking to teach, whatever it says on your degree, if you went to school and you made sculpture, but let's say you made interdisciplinary sculpture, new media was part of your work. If you have a master's degree of sculpture and you want to apply to a teaching job that's new media, they're going to first look at your degree, see that it's a sculpture degree, and wonder whether or not you're a fit. So if you're going to be looking at a school that offers a degree in a very specific thing, keep in mind if you're going to plan on teaching later, you're going to come across that and make sure that you address that whenever it gets to there. But keep in mind, I always like to have all of my options open. This closes it a little bit, but it's surmountable. It's not that big of a thing you can't overcome. So then here they talk about what you require to get in. I think it's important, again, like I said, to go through this. And it requires a degree in the subject area. So even though it says a bachelor's degree, a BA, a BFA, or a BSA, it specifically wants you to have a degree in these subject areas. So for instance, if you have a Bachelor of Fine Arts in photography, but you want to go into printmaking, you might have to address that in your statement because it's asking for a degree in the subject area, that like a undergraduate degree in the subject area of what you want to study. So if you're going to be switching and you have a very specialized specific degree, undergraduate degree, you're going to have to speak to that in your statement so they know what it is you're doing and looking for. And this is really just about making sure you're a fit and applying to programs that actually you're a fit for. So number of students in residence, there's 38. Can give you the breakdown via gender, talks about how many, what kind of organizations there are. There's lots of places that are really into sort of like student representation for the program department, which is fine. Let's go down to resources. So semi-private studios are available with unlimited hours. So this is 24-hour access to semi-private studios, means sharing a studio. Talks about the different things you have access to. If you notice here, it talks a lot about sort of printing, which I think is important. Like I said, this is known for printmaking, additional opportunities, graduate student housing office, financial aid, tuition aid remission, stipend, teaching assistantship, research assistant. All of our graduate students are funded by either a scholarship or an assistantship or a combination of both. That lays it out right there for you. So if you go to the U of A, all of their students are funded either by a scholarship, an assistantship, or a combination. So that gives you an answer there. You know, whenever anybody says, I don't know how to afford this, these are the things you're looking for. Okay, so I'll stop with that. And if you want me to go through more, I can, but that gives you an idea. And I'm just going through and looking at the questions I have so far. So someone asked whether or not the CAA guide and directory would be useful for MFA applications in theater or even dance or music. This one speaks specifically to the disciplines it lists on the front. So like visual arts, art history, museum studies, the things that lists on the front. It does not list theater programs, but one of the things that I've used is I've used this directory to look for MFA music and theater programs, because schools that have a large MFA program, whether it's in visual arts or other, tends to have pretty good programs in other disciplines of the MFA. So for instance, when I went to UC Irvine, they have Claire Trevor School of the Arts, which is a very well-known program for theater and dance. Not specifically music so much, but theater and dance they're known for. So if you're looking at larger schools, it will give you an idea. So if you're finding theater schools, one of the ways you can actually do background information is you find the schools you like in terms of your discipline, dance, music, theater with the MFA. You can actually go to this directory and look up the financial aid, because whatever the MFA, because every school, the university's programs, visual arts is usually housed in a bigger umbrella of the arts. So all of the programs, like if you look at the University of Calgary, they have the School of Business, School of Medicine, School of Veterinary Medicine, School of Law, School of Arts and Humanities, or Social Sciences, Arts and Social Sciences, depending on how they structure it. And then you're going to have like, I've seen hard sciences or just sciences, you know, whether you have like a BSc, like if you're going to go for a Bachelor of Science. So those they're called faculties. So let's say the School of Arts and Social Sciences, or the School of Arts and Humanities, they get a funding package from the university, and how they give funding to their students is usually faculty wide. So if you're looking at a school that in that directory I just showed you says that students get tuition aid remission, assistantships, teaching assistantships, I can pretty much guarantee you that those benefits, those tuition remission, all of that applies to all students in the MFA program, regardless if it's art, music, dance, or theater. So that's one way you can use that directory for that kind of information, but you'll have to find like the faculty, how many students, you'll have to find that on their website or through other courses. I have looked for directories like this in other disciplines and I can't find them. Sometimes you can find professional organizations for theater professionals or music professionals. I can't really find anything for dance. If anyone knows of any, I'm happy to take that information. I've looked for information like this regarding, like there's like law school. If you're looking to go to law school, there's law societies and there's all sorts of organizations, but I haven't found directories like this. It's one of those rare, fun things that a lot of people don't know about. And this is like my Bible when I'm helping students kind of figure out what they're doing. So then the next question. A lot of British schools are free to apply to, but you have to put a sizable deposit if you're accepted. Every school requires a deposit. So that's the other thing, especially if you're going out of country. So if you're a Canadian student and you're going to, this is not everyone, but this is 9 times out of 10. Germany, UK, the US, you require a student visa in order to, and even if you're a student coming into Canada, so I'll talk about it even in relationship to that. When you're a student going to another country, the government requires you to have a student visa. The school doesn't oversee those, the government does. The school will help you through that application, but it's a government requirement. You have to prove that you have the money you need to go to school there. So, for instance, if a student is coming into Canada and tuition is $10,000 a year and it's a 2-year program, they need $20,000 overall. The government of Canada requires a student coming into the country to prove that they have $20,000 in an account somewhere or accessible so that they can take care of themselves as a student while in the country, because countries don't want to provide student visas to students who can't afford and are going to end up, being homeless or hungry. And it's not so much that they're worried about people taking advantage of social systems. It's really just it's really just for care, in terms of care about students. So what you're looking at is you have to prove that. So I had to prove that I had $40,000 worth of money to go into the US. I did not have $40,000 worth of money. There are ways around this. So one of the ways you do this is my tuition remission counted as a scholarship, which by the way is taxable in Canada. So I had to pay tax on a US funded scholarship. So even though I didn't pay tuition, I paid tax on $20,000. So I had to prove, so they took off, so my $40,000 was what I had to prove. $20,000 of that was tuition scholarship. And then of course they put like living expenses that you have to prove you have. I actually pulled a student line of credit for $20,000, put it in my bank account. You take a snapshot from your bank that day that there's $20,000 available. That letter goes to the US government to get your visa. The next day I say, I do no longer want this line of credit. I pay it back to the bank. All said and done. That's how you get around it. Sounds horrible, but that's how a lot of people do it. Or if you're independently wealthy or have family that's independently wealthy, you can use them as well. But that is one way to do it. And yes, you have to pay a deposit. I think I had to put $5,000 down, US dollars, to go to school, and I managed to do it. So that, keep in mind, that's how that works. And then in terms of, would having an interdisciplinary MFA really restrict you from finding a job as a working teacher? No, not an interdisciplinary one. If you get an MFA in painting and you're applying to a job as a sculpture teaching job, they're going to question, are you a painter? Because sometimes when they're looking at your resume, the first things in an academic resume for an academic position, the first thing you always list is your education. It's not something that you put on the bottom. When they look at your resume and they see MFA painting and you're applying to a sculpture position, the first thing they're going to think is, wait, does this person make sense? So it's important to, either put, like, after it says MFA in painting, you can put, even if you took, like, so anything that's 6 courses or more is generally a minor. Find out if you have a minor from when you went to school. Did you do any work that actually covers that? So the interdisciplinary MFA is open-ended. If it says MFA Studio Art, MFA Interdisciplinary, they assume that you clearly make work that works towards what it is you're applying for the teaching position. So an interdisciplinary is actually good. It doesn't hurt you. If you have a strong portfolio in media art but are interdisciplinary, would institutions dismiss you? So a strong portfolio in media art but are interdisciplinary. Not necessarily, and it was a follow-up. That makes sense. But no, you wouldn't be dismissed. It really comes down to when institutions, so there's a difference between hiring committees that are looking at you for a job and application committees that are looking about whether to accept you into the program. So when you're talking about being accepted into a program and your portfolio is media art, but you're applying to an interdisciplinary program, they don't really care. Honestly, it comes down to when they're looking at your application, the first thing that all application committees look at is the work. All of the paperwork, all of the things you've written, your CV, your artist statement, your statement of purpose, and the application itself are in a file, okay? Like, no word of a lie, they actually print these out still, are in a file, and they look at the work first, and they don't even look at your file until they decide your work jives or not. If they're interested in your work, you get to the next stage. So you're gonna go through multiple stages of like, yep, we want to see more of that person. So think about it. And there are schools, like even like the Art Institute of Chicago, they have like 500 graduate students, which then begs the question, how much time they actually get with their graduate advisor. So that's another thing to look at. If you're going to school with a lot of students, make sure that your contact with whoever your advisor is decent, because otherwise you're going and you're not going to build that network with your faculty as much as you would with your students, with fellow students. So if you have, when you go through that application process and say there's 500 applicants, they go through it fast. And how they do it is they put the work up they project it up on a screen, and literally it's like 1, 2, 3. They look at the first 3 images, and if nobody's interested in seeing more, somebody says next, and they move on to the next person. And if you think of it in terms of time, And if there's 500 applications to go through, how much time does it take to go through one application thoroughly? Let's say it takes, 5 to 10 minutes to go through the images thoroughly, which you need more. But let's say it's just even cursory look. If they did that for every application, they're there for days. So they're looking at it 3 seconds. They're looking at the first 3 images. They're not interested in moving on. They don't. So keep that in mind. And, when you get through the 3, they go 1, 2, 3. Someone's like, yep. They keep going and they look at the rest of the images, and people can say stop without them being all the way through. And once they say, yep, interested, it goes into the next level of adjudication, which is where they start looking at the stuff you wrote. They're looking at, and the first things they look at are letters of recommendation. So after images, it goes letter of recommendation, then it goes artist statement, then statement of purpose, and then the application. And you've already been qualified through the graduate admissions office for your GPA and stuff. So then the file goes on to the faculty. So keep the process in mind, because if you understand the process, you understand what to put in there. When you're putting images together, generally you're never going to see schools ask for less than 10. They generally want 20, 10 to 20, 15, 12. I've seen lots of different variations. The rule of thumb does not have to be chronological. Do not do it chronological, especially considering what I just said about how they look at them. They look at the first 3 first. So if your images are in chronological order, they're going to look at your oldest work first. So they're going to look at because you would have done, your oldest work to your most recent work. So if there's 20 images, 1, 2, and 3 were made in 2005, and 17, 18, 19, and 20 are recent. Well, if they only look at the first 3, 1, 2, 3, they're looking at work that's, 15 years old and isn't your best work. So never, ever put your images together chronologically. The rule of thumb is this: put your best first, your best last, and good stuff in the middle. And then, so if you think about it if you think about 20, so your first 3 have to be good, your last 3 have to be good, and 9, 10, 11 have to be good. And then you kind of hide the crappy parts in between that. So between 4 and 7, and between, 12 to 16, you're going to hide stuff. Not hide it, but that's where you sandwich in the stuff that's not as strong. So that's the general rule of thumb when it comes to images. And you just basically break that down if it's a lesser number. And the reason it's got to be the first 3 good, you got to keep them interested. The reason why the last 3 have to be good is because the last things they see are the things that they're going to remember about you. And that's generally the rule. And do not think that if it asks for 10 images or 20 images, it has to be 20 separate pieces of work. Always make sure you include details. And specifically, if what you do specifically speaks to the material or your process, make sure that any of your images show that. Because if they don't know anything about you but what's on that screen, make sure that what they see on that screen is readable. They can understand what it is you do and what you're about by looking at the work. So keep that in mind. I've seen people actually include images of work that isn't even a full image. It's just a detail. So, and there's, ethical and unethical practices around certain things. You make those decisions. In terms of your CV, is there an ideal number for shows per year that they'll be looking for? Nobody expects students that have just come out of a graduate or an undergraduate degree to have a lot of shows. No one expects it. We expect you to have for sure 1. Usually, 1 to 5, totally normal. If you have none, that's kind of questionable, because then, if you've been in a BFA program, then the big question is well, what have you done? And in terms of what I'm talking about, in terms of images or documentation of your work and your CV, what I'm saying about images and documentation and the CV applies to theater, music, dance as well. In terms of how you put it together, you always put your best stuff at the front. Keep in mind, they're not going to watch the whole thing and then decide, because it would take them days and days and days to review. So, keep them, if you think about it, how it works from their end, you'll know that you got to keep it short and sweet. Nobody expects you to have been in 1 million productions or to have done 1 million exhibitions, but it's about quality, not quantity. So for instance, and when you go through the CAA is an excellent resource for what is quality, okay? Anything that's been juried or curated, you need to make sure that you indicate that, because the golden standard in academia, okay, which all of this is part of academia, is peer reviewed. Any work you've had that's peer reviewed. If we even think about it in terms of COVID, look at Anthony Fauci, okay? So anybody who's written studies, look at the article that just came out in the Lancet or the American Medical Association, or any of those things. Those are peer reviewed journals. So it's a group of people on a panel for that publication that you submit work to be read, and they choose what gets included in their medical journal. And if it's well researched, then they will choose it. So they have 100 articles to choose from. They choose you to publish, okay? The gold standard is peer reviewed. So a group of your peers, people that do the same thing you do, have decided that you were good enough to be included. So when you're juried, it's a group of your peers who've decided you're good enough to be included. If it's a curated exhibition, there is someone who's a professional in your field who's decided you're good enough to be included. So that is the gold standard. So if you have a bunch of exhibitions in your buddy's garage, or productions or musical performances, let's say there were flash mobs, or they were, I had a bunch of students once do an exhibition in the trunks of their car in a parking garage. Okay, like cool stuff, but it's not juried, it's not curated. It's a bunch of you coming together to show your work. It's valid, you list it, but the more, in terms of quality versus quantity, the more times you've been included, juried, or you've been curated, you've been deemed good enough in your field to be included, those are the things you want to make you have the most of. If you have none of those, that's fine. No one's expecting you to go into graduate school with a whole plethora of exhibitions. They do expect you to have done something, okay? So if you have nothing, it's a little bit questionable. If you don't have a lot of exhibitions, but let's say you have a lot of scholarships or awards, that's reasonable. Basically, anytime you are deemed to be good, like, I mean, good is such a relative term, but they've picked you out, okay? That a group of peers or professionals in your field have picked you out, those are the things you want on your CV. So let's say there's somebody wrote about you, and even in a blog, you put that on your CV. If you wrote about something, so even maybe your stuff hasn't been included, but you've gone out and you've curated exhibitions. Like maybe you guys have a gallery and a bunch of your friends get together and you're like, I'm going to put together a show, and the show's going to be about the body. And so I'm going to go around, I'm going to find a bunch of people to be part of my show, and I'm going to pick them. Then you are the curator. You put that on your resume. Okay. And how you list those is a little different. You can look at that guide I showed you and it'll actually walk you through all these. But anything you've done like that has to be included. It's really about your activity. The biggest thing is this: the more active someone has been in their community, the more they view that positively. So if you've done nothing, if you've just like sat in your home studio and made work but haven't received any grants, haven't gotten any awards, haven't shown at all, and you're really just kind of talking to yourself, then that puts a question mark in people's heads. They really just want to see you active in your community, whether it's through your work or through your actions. So like I said, less than one, questionable. If you have like 25, then people are going to start looking if they were actually valid, or if you're padding. The worst thing you can do is pad a resume or list an exhibition that's not an exhibition. I'll use an example that is kind of crappy, and I apologize. I know that there were some students when I was at ACAD that would list show and sale on their CV. That's not an exhibition in any way, shape, or form. It's a sale. It's like listing if you were part of like a market. You wouldn't list that on your CV. It's a professional activity where you're selling your work, but it wasn't on exhibition where people were engaging with your work just to engage with artwork. It wasn't and we can talk about commodity and artists front centers versus commercial galleries, but show and sale isn't an exhibition. An exhibition is something that takes place for just the viewing and sort of enjoyment of the work you know, when we talk about gallery representation and work being on display for sale, it's different. If you only have for sale activity on your CV, there will be a question mark. They want to see activity where your work was on exhibition or on view or produced or shown or shared for the sake of sharing, if that makes sense. There's a difference with that. So I hope that explains that. Obtaining letters of recommendation. Yes, I actually have friends that this happened to. Many of my professors from my BFA retired. Not unusual. Reach out to them. Even people who are retired or not actively participating, like for instance, let's say somebody who used to be a curator, but no, now they run a day home. Like honestly, lots of things happen. You can still go to them for a letter. If you have faculty members who are retired, they're sometimes some of the best people to ask for letters. They don't have to be current faculty members. If you have a hard time getting a hold of them, sometimes you can find them through Facebook or through social media. You can find them through LinkedIn. Or if they have a gallery that they show at, you can sometimes get a hold of them through their gallerist. There's ways to find them. So you're going to be looking for people. The biggest thing with recommendations, when I said that they look at recommendations right after work, they do. When they open your file, the first thing they look at is recommendations. They're looking for names. They're looking to see if anybody they know knows you. Because like all good things, you know, who you know becomes a thing. And people love to leverage who they know. So if you have 0 big names in your sort of universe to write you a letter, don't fret. It's not a big deal. It comes down to the quality of the letter. So I would much rather see a letter of recommendation by somebody who truly believes in the person they're writing the letter about than a letter of recommendation from a named person who just sort of knows the person they're writing about. The quality of the letter is huge. When you ask somebody for a recommendation, I tend to prefer people do it either in person or over the phone. Doing it by email is sometimes tough. The reason why is if you didn't, you have to have had a pretty good relationship with that person to get a good quality letter from them. Otherwise, you're going to get a form letter. I've seen those many times. The other thing is there's a rule unspoken that you don't write bad recommendation letters. But there are phrases that are used in recommendation letters to identify somebody that they don't support. One of the best well-known ones within academic, MFA, fine arts, visual art, was to use the term decorative. If a recommender used the term decorative in a letter to describe someone's work, it was an automatic sign that the recommender didn't actually support the work of the person, because at that time, decorative as a term was very looked down upon in the fine art world. Now, have times changed? For sure. Do things change as, you know, things are more in vogue than not? Yes. But there are general terms, and you'll never know what they all are. But the biggest thing is that if you ask somebody for a letter recommendation and they hesitate even a little bit, withdraw your request. So if somebody comes to me and says, Marianne, will you write me a letter of recommendation for, you know, the University of Alberta? And I go, yeah, I could do that. When do you need it by? Question whether or not my heart's in really helping you out. Do the people that you're asking for recommendations really want to see you succeed, find joy in watching you go further, fully support what it is you do? Those are the people you want letters from. You know, if you go to somebody who, you know, you sort of you were in a class with, or sort of, you know, did some stuff with, but they don't know a ton about your work, even if they do support you, they're not the best person. Try to find somebody who can really speak to you as a person, because those letters that really resonate are going to do the best for you. So, and, you know, some people who have been out of school for a long time, that's another thing. Who do you get? You can usually try to come up with 3 people who are still within the art community who can write a letter for you. And like I said, if they believe in you heavily, it doesn't matter who they are or how they know you. It'll be one of the better letters. So I hope that helps. And then if there's any other questions, about sort of figuring some of this stuff out. Like I said, a lot of the stuff isn't available on the web. It's hard to find. But there are sometimes other associations will have directories. Sometimes if you ask really pointed questions of the program. So I find don't email. Don't give them the chance to sort of couch their answers. Call the graduate program coordinator wherever the school is and ask them pointed questions. How many students receive teaching assistantships? They say all of them? Great. You know, if you can say, if a student has a teaching assistantship, do they have tuition waived? Ask them the pointed question. That's where you're going to get a lot of answers. The other thing, the people in the office of the, like, so there in large institutions, you have the Office of Graduate Admissions, where your application goes to. They're the ones that figure out whether or not you have the right GPA, if you have all the pieces of your application together. You know, you have the proper undergraduate degree to qualify you into the program. Then they send your file over to the department. So like the fine art department, the theater department. So you have to get through that hurdle first. But when you get to your department, so the disciplines department, the people that run that office, they can lose your application. So if you are what we would call a PITA, a pain in the ass, and I this sounds horrible, but I've seen it happen. So I always think it's important to give people information. So, you know, whether it's right or wrong, it's out there. If somebody calls in, oh, my favorite for undergrad is parents. If parents fill out the application, parents are the one that shows up. Parents are the one that are doing all the talking. It's noted on the file. So if your mom's calling to see whether or not tuition is waived for your graduate program, it's going to be noted on the file your mom called. Unless there's a really good reason, like there's some sort of like disability or accommodation that's required, only then would that be sort of acceptable. But if you aren't able to take the initiative and do that yourself, it's going to be noted. If you call every day and ask the same question over and over again, I have seen office workers lose files on purpose. I've actually seen it. I've complained about it, but it happens. So keep in mind that everybody you interact with, they are another gatekeeper. Okay, if you keep that in mind and you treat, and my other thing, like one of the things I used to tell students, if you need money and you're in school, and by the way, you usually receive more money in your second year than you do in your first. That's also a general knowledge. If you need money and you need opportunities to make money as a student, the people that actually decide who gets assistantships, research assistantships, other work on campus are usually the administrators in the office. So I always tell students, wherever you're going, treat people with respect. Be respectful, be generous with yourself in terms of like, don't give yourself away, but like, you know, be nice, be respectful, you know, develop relationships with those people. You'd be surprised how much access they have to help you out. So, you know, just remember, everybody that you encounter that's involved with an institution is a gatekeeper of some sort, and treat people how you wish to be treated, the golden rule. Documentation for installation art is video. Does this affect MAJs if they have to sit through a minute? Yes, it does. If all your work is video, they look at slides first. Okay, so like, I'm sorry I say slides, but they look at images first before they look at moving images or before they look at sound. Now, of course, if it's a music degree, it's going to be a little different. Theater is going to be different, but generally, here's the rule. Always include stills. So in your documentation package, say they ask for 15 to 20. If they ask for 15 to 20, try to give them as many as you can. If you have running time or sound, like moving images or sound, try to always include an installation still. So especially if you do video installation, you would have an image of the installation. You would have a still image of the video, maybe a couple of still images of the video. And then you would have the video documentation, which, by the way, if you have a 10-minute long video, do not submit 10 minutes. They won't even let you, actually. They will say 1 to 3 minutes. Sometimes they just say 2. Sometimes it's 1. I've even seen some that say like 30 seconds. So you literally have like 1 minute to get whatever your video is about into that. Like if it's a 10-minute video and you got to narrow it down to 1 minute, it's going to be a tough minute to choose. But like I said, they're going to watch, keep in mind the first things they see, they're going to stop it. They're not going to sit through 1 minute of video. If every single application has a minute of video or sound that they have to listen to or watch, do you really think they're going to watch the full minute? No, they won't. So the first thing they see, make sure it's engaging and tells the story. And, you know, you can always put like front load, you know, so if you have 1 minute worth, the first 20 seconds should be like the best. And then you can do a clip and then sort of transition into a little bit more information. So if they get a taste of what it's about, so they see the image, the still, then the first 20 seconds, they get a taste of what it's about, and then you can make a transition in the edit. So then you give them a little bit more information. So if they want to keep watching, they get more information. But their attention span is short. Always consider that. Attention span is short. Don't think if your practice is all based on sort of like the pregnant pause or the leading up to, really think about how you're documenting your work, because they won't sit through it. And it sucks, it's horrible, but it's truth. And you can also include, like, if you have a video, you can do, you know, you can actually say in your documentation group, like you have the still, you can say excerpt and the running time and say 30 seconds. They might choose that. And if they're interested enough, then you can say full video, 3 minutes, and they can go and watch that. Like, don't worry about using one of those, because if you only have 20 pieces of documentation you use, don't worry about using one of those as an excerpt or a full, but make sure you record what it is so they know, like you write down what it is so they know what it is they're looking at, and they'll pick and choose. But I'll tell you this, when they're looking at, like within a studio art program, they look at images first and they do time-based media second, always. Unless it's a program that's really heavily based in timed media, you know? So like I remember there was schools, I got lazy in my applications. There were schools that, well, I actually had a professor also tell me that it was 15 to 20 images and I was including 20. She told me it was too many and I needed to get rid of some. And I got rid of all of my stills of my videos. And the school that I got into with the full ride had the full 20. Coincidence? I think not after having sat through 1 million of the committees. So it's important, even if, you know, theater and you're providing, like they're going to ask for very specifically, they're going to ask for, you know, video of productions or performances. They want that. That's part, and there's also auditions. Yeah, the other thing is auditions and interviews. Oh, I can't tell you how important those are. If you can, you know, COVID changes things, but if you can, be there in person. Like literally do everything you can to be there in person. It makes a humongous difference. And prepare, do the best you can. And honestly, things work out the way they're supposed to. You got to trust in that too. You know, everything happens for a reason. Are there any other questions or anything else? Canadian government financial support for international studies. Canadian government financial support. There are for internet. Okay, so I'm going to take this question of, can I get Canada student loans to study out of country? Is that the question? Yeah, okay. So yes, you can. So Canada will provide student loans to Canadian citizens to study out of country. The maximum amount is not the same maximum amount you would get as if you studied in country. But for instance, I did my whole undergrad on student loans and owed a whole bunch of money. But because I had a full ride to do my grad, like I said, second year, you always get more money because you get more assistantships, more opportunities, more opportunity to make money. Your tuition's covered the same. But for me, it was about like housing and feeding, you know, sort of like, and materials, taking care of things. I actually applied for a Canada student loan. I was in Ontario, so it was in Ontario and federal. Here would be Alberta and federal. Student loan when I was in California, and I got half of what I would normally get if I was home. They have changed that since then. They actually provide more funding now. and some of it is also grant funding. So yes, Canada government does offer money for you to go outside the country. Disabilities. So yes, when you're applying to student loans and you indicate you have a disability, whether it's a learning disability or a physical or other disability, there are specific funding mechanisms that come into place. Those things will also support you if you are not studying in Canada. So yes, there's support. Thankfully, the Canadian government does support you. I can't say it's the same everywhere else or every other way, but yeah, and you do not qualify for government funding in the US as a non-US student, but I know that in other countries, not necessarily in the UK, I haven't seen that, but I've seen stuff in Germany and in Scandinavia specifically, that the government will sometimes fund certain things for students who are from out of overseas. But it also depends on program, depends on institution. Remember, schools make most of their money through international student tuition. Keep that in mind. So,
could I add something really quick?
oh yeah, because you know a lot about Germany.
Oh, I went to my master's program in Britain, and I actually found out my year that I went for my disability, they sort of, you have to go through not provincially, federally, because the provincial one, they're just like, oh, we'll just let you not pay $2,000 back on your loan. That's what our disability is for you.
Yeah.
So that's it. And
yeah,
it's
so
like, oh,
it was student loan waiver.
yeah, that's it. That was kind of disappointing because they're the way they phrase it. So you have to be careful when you read it, especially when you go overseas. Everything slightly isn't what you think it is, especially with British schools, I find.
Well, no, everywhere. So like the way
Yeah.
they talk about things, it's literally a different language. Like they use terms for things that we don't use here. The term we use here does not mean the same thing somewhere else. And so it's really hard. And it takes time to decipher that for sure.
Yeah. So just be careful if you do go overseas. Sometimes you might get screwed. Not necessarily screwed, but you might get like surprised with how they deal with things over there and how they deal with your grants. Like I went to Belfast and they did not quite understand the part of Canada I was in, which was very strange. So I had to prove that I went to ACAD by showing them like a direct copy of my diploma, like my degree. And they're like, oh, we didn't understand Alberta was in Canada. And it was such a strange, you have to be careful. And make sure you have all your documentations with you.
Yeah, and specifically to ACAD, or AU Arts, which I'll speak to.
Sorry,
AU Arts doesn't actually have AUCC accreditation. They have NASAD accreditation. And there's a difference. So most institutions in Canada have AUCC. So we had students when they graduated from the bachelor's degree, applied for school in Quebec, Ontario, and they actually wouldn't accept their applications because they didn't recognize ACAD's degree. And I was there when it was ACAD, so it's easier for me to just call it that because that's what I'm used to. And so I was the registrar, and I would get these phone calls from students saying, like, I can't apply to grad school because they don't recognize my degree. Why the hell don't they recognize my degree? And it's because we didn't have AUCC accreditation. We were accredited by a binational organization, NASAD. They hadn't gone through for AUCC for a bunch of reasons. They were in the process of doing it, but it's like a 5-year, 10-year undertaking to get the accreditation. And we met all the criteria. So it wasn't that the degree didn't meet the criteria. It was literally just getting the rubber stamp. So we had to work with a lot of other schools to make sure that they didn't automatically throw out the applications from our students to make sure that they were able to, be evaluated. So keep that in mind. If the school you came from isn't accredited by the national and local sort of accrediting body, it may not get through the first hoop. I know that sounds crazy, but it's true. PhD or doctorate of fine arts does become a terminal degree. Would it disqualify? No. So this is thankfully, because trust me, I have an MFA. I've looked into this. And I've thought about going for a PhD. I just can't really figure out exactly what I would want to go for, which is like what I would want to do that intensive research in, which is why I haven't done it. So a PhD or a Doctor of Fine Arts, it's very likely that it will become a terminal degree at some point in the future. One of the things that's holding it back from becoming a terminal degree right now is because there is no standardized curriculum for those degrees. So there are schools that have studio-based PhDs in visual arts, and there's schools that you can only get a PhD in theoretically, a theoretical sort of PhD. So it's writing, it's research and writing of critical theory, and that's a PhD in studio art versus an actual studio-based PhD in studio art. And you would think, you know, well, that's the same thing in an MFA, but all theoretical-based MFAs also have a studio component. So there are some PhDs that don't have the studio component, and because it's not standardized, it's not the terminal degree yet. It just hasn't been accepted as, but because they've been around for so long, I don't see, I can't imagine it's going to be another 20 years. You know, I think it's going to be a little, you know, maybe 5 to 10. We're going to start to see that. But when they do that, what they do is they do it's called grandfathering, like anything else, just like a bylaw. If you have a basement suite, you know, nowadays, if you have a basement suite in your home, you have to have separate electrical panels. But a long time ago, you didn't, so they grandfathered them in. So basically, the MFA will continue to be seen as a terminal degree for people to a certain point. So let's say, and I don't predict the future, but let's say in 2028, they make the PhD in visual arts the terminal degree. Everyone who received an MFA prior to 2028 will be grandfathered in as a terminal degree to an extent. You may find that 2025 to 2028, you're pushing it, but generally, when they do switch over, you're going to find MFA programs getting much longer or more in depth, which is partly why I think you're seeing a move to 3-year programs. So do you get what I'm saying? So right now, if you went for an MFA, I think you're safe for the next 5 years and you would be grandfathered in. So that's basically what I've learned and what I've been told. But this is one of the reasons they haven't moved to that being the terminal degree, because there's a whole bunch of people with MFAs that, you know, can't necessarily afford to go back to school for a PhD. But you're going to find a lot of upgrading programs pop up as well that will actually move your MFA into a PhD category. For that reason, it'd probably only be a 2-year piece. We'll see. If a PhD, would it disqualify anyone? And I just want to see about the disqualifying. It wouldn't disqualify you. I will say though that I'll say this. So if you have an MFA and it's a terminal degree and you try to teach an English class at a college, they're going to, and they require terminal degrees, they're going to question you. So everyone outside of art, whether it's theater, dance, music, or visual art, if you have an MFA and not a PhD, every discipline that requires a PhD is going to question the validity of your MFA. So I'm just going to warn you that a lot of people are not aware that the MFA within art is a terminal degree. It is generally accepted, like definitely all post-secondary institutions accept it as the terminal degree. You can look it up pretty much anywhere. But if you're talking to somebody with a PhD in English, they're going to be, what do you mean it's a terminal degree? So just keep that in mind. But yeah, you won't have problems. But if you're on a hire, like if you're going for a job, depending, a lot of times the hiring committees are just representative of faculty in the discipline you're applying for, but sometimes you will have faculty from other departments. So you'll have a geography and an English professor on a tenure track appointment hiring for a sculpture position. And they're there to assess whether or not your research, which is the work you make and what you do. So like if it's you're a curator or you're an artist, to make sure that your creative research is up to par with research standards, which then, like I said, it's about quality, which is about peer reviewed. That's the gold standard. So that's a lot about like sort of life after, but you know, and yep.
Sorry, I was just going to say, would you be okay if people emailed you directly with questions?
Absolutely, because
Yeah.
a lot of this is like a lot of the things you'll run into, the questions you have are going to be just really specifically about your situation. And so I'm happy to answer questions if anybody wants to reach out via email.
Yeah, her email is actually elephantartistrelief@gmail.com. Marianne is also our administrator.
Yeah.
But if you don't remember that, you can also email me and I will forward it to Marianne. And I'm earprogramming@gmail.com. I feel like we might need to wrap this up. Oh, there's one more question from Katie. I think that might
Oh,
have to be
yeah.
our last question because we're hitting a long
Mhm.
time period now. But you can go ahead.
Yeah, so if you go overseas, make sure your health insurance coverage starts as soon as you are there. Yeah. So specifically, I can't think of any other sort of like civilized nation that doesn't have, you know, standard healthcare except the US. So for instance, when I went to the US, I crossed the border, I think it was September 14th, but my classes didn't start until the 28th or something like that. And no, I didn't have healthcare until classes started. So if anything had happened to me in those days between, I would have been SOL. So keep that in mind. Keep in mind also that, and usually generally when you're going to school, a state school, specifically in the US, or a public institution, the healthcare is usually pretty good. Specifically, I had great healthcare because the school, University of California, Irvine, had a huge medical program. So I got fantastic healthcare and I didn't care if it was student doctors working on me. It was great. Same with dental and everything else. But if you're going to a private institution, really look at the kind of healthcare they have, specifically if you're going to the US, and make sure it covers everything. Because you never know. Mind you, the Canadian government, when you're in school and you're a student abroad, they're a lot better to deal with than if you're visiting abroad. There's a difference. Yeah, do you have something to add to that?
Katie?
Jackie, do you
Oh,
have any?
No, yeah. I was at a hospital a few years ago. I had gotten bitten by a dog, but this poor student was there who had an appendicitis, and he had just come from China, and school didn't start for another week, and his coverage didn't start for another week, and so they were in a bit of a dilemma. It was a really tough time, and it made it harder being so far for that kid. So I felt for him, and I thought, oh yeah, you got to make sure you're covered as soon as you step on that in that place. Yeah.
the
And
alternative is like NHS. When I went to school
yeah,
in Britain, then you have to pay into the NHS to get your visa. So even if you didn't pay in, it's free there anyway. But no, you're paying and you'll be covered the minute you get there. So just be aware of that. You have to pay a lot to get there.
the other thing is
Sorry,
keep in
Marianne.
mind, like I know at ACAD for our international students, and this is a lot of Canadian programs. If you're an international student, and this might actually, I would look at this if I was looking at Europe, but UK as well, your health coverage is tied to the tuition and fees that you pay. It's part of the fee. So until you actually have paid it, you're not covered.